My sister accidentally added me to a hidden family group chat just days before the holidays. There were 50 messages detailing a massive Christmas party I was explicitly excluded from. My mother wrote, "Make sure she does not find out." My brother replied, "Just tell her the wrong date like last year so she stays away." I sat in my office staring at the screen, took screenshots of every single message, and then sent one reply to the chat. "Merry Christmas. Christmas, your realtor will explain the rest." The next day I drove up the mountain to deliver the punchline in person. I am Alyssa, 33 years old, and a forensic accountant who specializes in tracking down money people try to hide. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. The drive up the winding roads to Lake Tahoe was blindingly white and freezing, but the cold outside was nothing compared to the ice in my veins. For years I had been the family ATM, the quiet scapegoat who fixed their financial disasters while they showered all their praise on my younger sister Brittany. I was the one working 80-hour weeks tracing offshore accounts for federal investigations, while Brittany bounced from one expensive hobby to another, funded entirely by my parents' dwindling credit lines. When I finally pulled my SUV into the expansive driveway of my $2.5 million cabin, the sheer audacity of the scene almost made me laugh. Planted right in the middle of the snow-covered front lawn was a massive wooden sign. It read, "Sold," in bold red letters, featuring a glossy, retouched photo of my brother-in-law Jamal. Jamal is an African-American luxury realtor who relies heavily on his charm, his impeccably tailored suits, and a blatant disregard for ethical boundaries. He had married Brittany 2 years ago, and my parents treated him like royalty, constantly bragging about his high-profile real estate deals to anyone who would listen. The driveway was packed with luxury vehicles. Through the massive floor-to-ceiling A-frame windows I could see a catered holiday party in full swing. Waiters in crisp white shirts were circulating with silver trays of appetizers. A towering Christmas tree dominated the great room, glittering with expensive glass ornaments. This was not just a family gathering. This was a closing party. They were celebrating the sale of a house that did not belong to them. I killed the engine, stepped out into the freezing mountain air, and walked straight up the stone steps. I did not bother knocking. I kicked the heavy oak front door open with enough force to make it slam against the interior wall. The festive jazz music playing through the sound system seemed to completely cut out as every head in the room turned toward the entryway. Near the grand stone fireplace, Jamal was holding a bottle of expensive champagne mid-laugh, standing next to an older gentleman in a cashmere sweater, who I immediately recognized from his corporate profiles as Mr. Henderson, a wealthy out-of-state investor. I casually peeled off my snow-covered coat and tossed it directly onto the pristine white staging sofa my mother had rented for the event. The snow immediately began melting into the expensive fabric. Patricia, my mother, was the first to recover from the shock. She marched across the room, her face flushing a deep, angry crimson beneath her heavy makeup. She grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my sleeve, and lowered her voice to a furious, venomous whisper. "What are you doing here? Your cheap clothes are ruining my imported rug. Are you here to ruin Brittany's day, just because she married a successful man like Jamal? You are always so jealous and bitter." I looked down at her hand, then looked her dead in the eye. I stepped forward, deliberately grinding my wet, snow-packed boots deeper into the expensive fibers of the rug. "Imported rug? You mean the one paid for by my cheap forensic accountant's salary 5 years ago when Dad was dodging the IRS? You know, the year I wiped out my savings to keep you two out of federal prison while you were busy buying Brittany a new car." My mother staggered back as if I had physically struck her. "The golden child herself," Brittany gasped from across the room, clutching her champagne flute like a pearl necklace. But it was Jamal who stepped up to take control of this situation. He handed his glass to a waiter, adjusted the cuffs of his custom suit, and approached me. His tall, imposing frame was meant to be intimidating, a tactic I was sure worked well on naive buyers, but it did absolutely nothing to me. "You are trespassing, sister-in-law," Jamal said, his voice dropping into a low, threatening register intended to put me in my place. "Mr. Henderson and I just signed the final closing papers for $3 million. This is a private event for the new owner. Get out before I call security and have you dragged off the mountain. I did not flinch. I did not back away. I reached into my bag, pulled out my phone, and gave him a bright, chilling smile. You signed? I asked, my voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent room. Using the power of attorney, I legally revoked 30 days ago. Mr. Henderson's crystal champagne glass stopped halfway to his mouth. The expensive amber liquid sloshed against the gold rim as his hand froze in midair. He lowered the glass slowly, his sharp, calculating eyes darting between me and Jamal. He was a smart, ruthless businessman, and he could instantly smell when a deal was going sideways. What exactly does she mean by that, Jamal? Mr. Henderson asked, his voice completely devoid of its previous festive warmth. Is there a title dispute on this property? Because I was guaranteed a free and clear transfer today. Before Jamal could spin one of his signature fast-talking lies, my older brother Tyler shoved his way through the crowd of stunned party guests. Tyler always wore his desperation like a cheap cologne, and today it was practically radiating off him. He stepped directly between me and Mr. Henderson, holding up his hands in a frantic, placating gesture. He flashed a brilliant, entirely fake smile at the wealthy investor. Mr. Henderson, please accept my deepest apologies for this interruption, Tyler said, forcing a nervous chuckle that echoed terribly in the silent room. My sister Alyssa has a long history of being mentally unstable. She has these severe episodes where she gets confused about reality and tries to claim things that do not belong to her. This beautiful house has belonged to our father Richard for years. She is just having a manic episode right now. We will have her escorted off the mountain immediately so we can finish celebrating your new home. I did not raise my voice, but the absolute ice in my tone made Tyler step back. An episode, I asked, locking eyes with my brother. Is that what we are calling it now? Because the last time you told people I was having a mental episode, you were desperately trying to explain why I refused to co-sign a massive business loan for your fake consulting firm, a firm that went completely bankrupt 3 months later. I am not having an episode, Tyler. I am entirely sober and completely lucid, which is vastly more than anyone can say for you on most weekday mornings. Right on cue, the family's secret weapon deployed. Brittany let out a loud, theatrical sob from across the room. She practically threw herself toward Mr. Henderson, clutching his cashmere sleeve with perfectly manicured hands. Real tears pooled in her eyes, instantly a manipulative trick she had mastered by the age of 7. Please do not listen to a single word she says, Brittany cried, her voice trembling with manufactured distress. She has always been exactly like this. She is obsessed with ruining my happiness. She has been insanely jealous of me ever since I went to a prestigious medical school, while she was stuck being just a boring, invisible number cruncher. She absolutely hates that I married a successful, powerful man, and she cannot stand to see our family prosper. She is just trying to extort us. I walked straight past Tyler's trembling frame and slammed a heavy, thick manila folder onto the white marble kitchen island. The sharp smack of heavy paper against the stone echoed like a gunshot, making several guests jump. A prestigious medical school, I asked, looking directly at my sobbing, perfectly styled sister. Is that the fairy tale story we are telling your new high society friends? Or should we tell them the actual truth about how Mom and Dad secretly drained my entire college savings account to pay your out-of-state tuition? And let us not forget the absolute best part, Brittany. You dropped out after exactly 2 semesters because waking up at 6 in the morning was too difficult for you. I had to take out federal loans with a 9% interest rate to become the number cruncher you despise so much. And you dropped out of life to become Jamal's unpaid secretary because reading anatomy textbooks cut into your weekly spa days. Brittany choked on her fake tears, her face turning a blotchy, furious red. She opened her mouth to scream at me, but I had already turned my attention completely back to the buyer. I slid the open manila folder across the marble island directly toward him. Read the deed, Mr. Henderson, I instructed firmly. Look at the very top line. Mr. Henderson pulled a pair of reading glasses from his shirt pocket and leaned over the document. The silence in the room was so profound, you could hear the pine logs popping in the massive stone fireplace. His eyes scanned the legal print, and I watched his jaw tighten with mounting fury. The name on that official property deed is Alyssa, I stated loudly, ensuring every single guest in the room heard the undeniable truth. My parents do not own this property. They have never owned this property for a single day. They are simply glorified tenants who have been living here rent-free because I took pity on them when the bank foreclosed on their last house. They have absolutely zero legal authority to sell this cabin to you or anyone else. Mr. Henderson ripped his glasses off his face and glared violently at Jamal. You looked me in the eye and told me your father-in-law was the sole proprietor of this estate. You promised me the title was free and clear. What kind of amateur scam are you running here, Jamal? Jamal wiped a heavy bead of sweat from his forehead. His smooth, confident facade was severely cracking under the pressure, but he was a cornered animal, which made him incredibly dangerous. He adjusted his stance, trying to physically loom over the island. He reached inside the breast pocket of his custom Tom Ford suit and pulled out a sharply folded piece of heavy legal paper. He slapped it down on top of my deed with an arrogant thud. Do not listen to a single word she says. Mr. Henderson. Jamal said, his voice rising in volume as he desperately tried to regain control of the narrative in the room. He pointed a long, aggressive finger at the paper he had just produced. I am a licensed Nevada realtor. I know the law inside and out. This is a fully notarized power of attorney document, and it has Alyssa's exact signature right there on the bottom line. It gives me full, unquestionable legal authority to execute the sale of this property on her behalf. He turned his body toward me, his chest puffed out, a threatening, malicious glare in his dark eyes. This document is legally binding, Alyssa. The contract is signed. The deal is completely done. Are you seriously prepared to break a legal contract and personally pay the $300,000 earnest money penalty? I did not flinch at Jamal's threat. Instead, I let out a short, sharp laugh that cut through the tension in the room. Jamal's chest deflated just a fraction, his confident posture wavering as he realized I was not intimidated by his loud voice or his empty legal threats. I looked at the notarized document in his hand, then back up to his sweating face. I am perfectly prepared to deal with any legal penalties, Jamal. I replied, my voice steady and clear. But you seem to be missing a fundamental concept of contract law. A revoked power of attorney renders any subsequent agreement void from inception. There is no legally binding contract to break. I am not the one who owes a penalty. I am the victim of attempted real estate fraud. I turned my back on Jamal, completely dismissing him as a threat, and focused my attention on the older man standing near the fireplace. Mr. Henderson was watching this exchange with the intensity of a man who suddenly realized he might be standing on a trap door. Mr. Henderson, I said, shifting into the professional tone I used when deposing hostile witnesses in federal court. I am a forensic accountant. My entire career is dedicated to tracking missing funds, exposing shell corporations, and finding out exactly where wealthy people try to hide their assets. I want to ask you a very specific question about this transaction, and I strongly advise you to answer me honestly. Mr. Henderson straightened his posture, his initial anger at me morphing into genuine concern. Ask your question, he said firmly. When you signed that fraudulent contract with my brother-in-law, you were required to put down a 10% earnest money deposit, I stated, pacing slowly around the kitchen island. That is $300,000. Standard real estate procedure dictates that those funds must be wired directly into a neutral licensed title company escrow account. Is that what you did? Before Mr. Henderson could open his mouth to answer, my father pushed his way to the front of the crowd. Richard's face was purple with rage, the veins in his neck bulging against the collar of his expensive holiday sweater. How dare you disrespect Jamal's professional integrity in front of his clients? My father bellowed, pointing a shaking finger at me. Jamal is a licensed broker who works tirelessly to support your sister. He has built a reputation in this community. You have no right to barge in here and hurl wild accusations just because you are bitter and alone. I slowly turned my gaze from Mr. Henderson to my father. The sheer delusion of his statement was almost magnificent. Integrity, I asked, letting the word hang in the air for a heavy second. Are we really going to talk about Jamal's professional integrity, Dad? Because I have a very clear memory of exactly what his integrity looks like. I stepped closer to my parents, making sure everyone in the room could hear me. Let us take a quick trip down memory lane to 5 years ago, I announced. I bought my first condo in Reno. When I needed to sell it, you and Mom begged me to let Jamal handle the listing so he could earn the commission and build his portfolio. I agreed because I thought we were family. The condo sold for a profit, but somehow when the final settlement statement arrived, exactly $20,000 of my equity had mysteriously vanished. Jamal tried to interrupt loudly, claiming it was a bank error, but I talked right over him. "You called it a routing mistake caused by the buyer's lender," I said, staring Jamal down. "You looked me in the eye and swore the bank had seized the funds for administrative fees. I was 28 years old and trusted you, so I ate the loss." But the very next week, Brittany was walking around wearing a brand new Cartier diamond bracelet that cost exactly $20,000. "Do not ever speak to me about his integrity again," Brittany shrieked from the corner, calling me a liar, but Mr. Henderson raised his hand, signaling for absolute silence. The wealthy investor was no longer looking at my family. He was looking at me, recognizing a fellow professional who dealt strictly in facts. "Miss Alyssa," Mr. Henderson said, his voice deadly serious. "I wired the $300,000 yesterday morning. I was given specific wiring instructions by Jamal, who claimed the title company had recently updated their banking details for the holiday weekend." I nodded, anticipating exactly that answer. I pulled my iPad from my leather work bag and woke up the screen. The glowing light reflected in the polished marble of the kitchen island. "That is the classic setup for wire fraud," I explained calmly, my fingers flying across the digital keyboard as I logged into my secure tracking software. Criminals create a sense of urgency, often using a holiday weekend as the excuse for irregular banking procedures. They intercept the transaction and provide alternate routing numbers. In this case, the criminal was acting as the agent himself. I tapped a few more keys, accessing a specialized database I used for tracking corporate registrations. My parents and siblings watched in stunned silence, unable to comprehend the digital trap I was springing on them. "I just need you to confirm one detail, Mr. Henderson," I said, looking up from the screen. "Did you wire that massive sum of money to a licensed title company? Or did the wiring instructions direct your funds into a limited liability company named Apex Realty Solutions?" All the color instantly drained from Mr. Henderson's face. He looked as though the floor had simply given way beneath him. He pulled his phone from his pocket with shaking hands, frantically swiping through his email to find the wire confirmation receipt. "It was Apex," Mr. Henderson choked out, his voice barely a whisper. "Apex Realty Solutions. Jamal told me it was the holding company for the escrow firm." I turned the iPad around and slid it across the marble counter so Mr. Henderson could clearly read the screen. I did not need to look at Jamal to know his reaction. The heavy, panicked silence coming from his direction told me everything I needed to know. "Apex Realty Solutions is not an escrow firm," I announced, ensuring my voice carried over the soft holiday jazz still playing in the background. "It is an offshore shell company registered in Delaware. And if you look right there at the managing director's name, you will see it belongs solely to Jamal. He did not put your money in a safe escrow account, Mr. Henderson. He stole it." Jamal let out a loud, forced laugh that cracked halfway through. He looked around the room, desperate to recruit anyone to his side of the reality he was rapidly losing control of. He pointed a trembling finger at the large television screen where my iPad was currently casting the damning financial records. "This is absolutely ridiculous," Jamal declared, his voice pitching higher than usual. "Mr. Henderson, please. You are a man of the world. You understand how complex real estate syndication works. Apex Realty Solutions is simply a standard third-party vendor we use to hold international earnest money. It is a completely legitimate holding firm. My sister-in-law is just throwing around scary buzzwords to intentionally sabotage a deal because she is holding a petty family grudge." I did not raise my voice, but I tapped the screen of my iPad. The image on the massive television shifted instantly from the banking transaction history to a highly detailed organizational chart. I had spent my entire flight from Seattle mapping out this exact corporate structure. "A standard third-party vendor?" I asked, stepping right up to Jamal, so he had nowhere to look but my face. "Let us trace this legitimate holding firm, shall we? Apex Realty Solutions is registered to a post office box in Delaware. The registered agent for that LLC is another company located in the Cayman Islands. But the ultimate beneficial owner, the person who holds the exclusive unhindered access to the actual checking account where Mr. Henderson wired his $300,000, is a man named Jamal Davis." I have the certified bank records directly from the routing institution right here on the screen. Mr. Henderson leaned in close to the television, his eyes narrowing as he read the highlighted yellow text on the bank charter. His face turned a dangerous shade of purple. My mother. Patricia rushed forward, frantically waving her hands as if she could physically wipe the image off the screen. Alyssa, stop this nonsense right now, she commanded, her tone dripping with the same condescending authority she used when I was a teenager. Jamal is an elite professional. He would never do something so reckless. You have obviously hacked into a computer and typed his name into these documents just to ruin Brittany's special day. You have always been so spiteful. Brittany took her cue immediately. She shoved past her husband and got right in my face, her eyes wide with manufactured rage. She pointed a French manicured acrylic nail inches from my nose. You are a manipulative, lying psycho. Brittany screamed, her voice echoing off the vaulted wooden ceilings of the cabin. You manipulated these documents. You are just a bitter, lonely woman who is obsessed with destroying my marriage because no one wants you. You think you can just march in here and pretend to be some big-shot investigator. You are a glorified calculator. I did not flinch at her screaming. I calmly reached out, grabbed her pointing finger, and pushed her hand down away from my face. You really think a forensic accountant does not know how to track a wire transfer? I asked, my voice deadly calm. I spent the last 4 years testifying as an expert witness in federal court. This is exactly what I do for the FBI, Brittany. I track down cartel money. I expose corporate embezzlers who use software 10 times more sophisticated than whatever cheap template Jamal found on Google. Do you honestly believe a guy who failed his real estate exam 3 times before passing can successfully hide offshore accounts from a federal financial investigator? Brittany staggered back, her mouth opening and closing without any sound coming out. The mention of the FBI hung in the air, sucking all the remaining oxygen out of the room. My father Richard grabbed his chest, his face pale. He stepped toward Mr. Henderson, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. Mr. Henderson, let us not overreact. My father pleaded, sweat now visibly pouring down his temples. This is just a massive family misunderstanding. My daughter is prone to exaggeration. Even if Jamal accidentally put the funds in the wrong operating account, we can simply reverse the wire transfer right now. No harm done. We will move the money back and proceed with the closing. We are honorable people. I turned to my father, giving him a look of absolute disgust. You cannot just reverse the transaction, Dad. This is not a return sweater at a department store. Jamal knowingly provided fraudulent wiring instructions to a buyer. The exact second that $300,000 crossed state lines into an unregistered shell company, it ceased to be an administrative error. It became interstate wire fraud. That is a federal felony carrying a minimum sentence of 20 years in a federal penitentiary. Mr. Henderson turned to Jamal, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles were completely white. He did not look like a festive holiday party guest anymore. He looked like a man ready to commit violence. Return the money, Mr. Henderson growled, stepping into Jamal's personal space. Right now, pull up your banking app on your phone, log into whatever pathetic shell company you created, and wire my $300,000 back into my primary account immediately. Jamal swallowed hard. He looked at Brittany, then at my parents, then finally at the floor. He pulled at his collar as if it were suddenly choking him. I cannot do that, Sir Jamal stammered, his voice barely a squeak. The funds are currently restricted. They are tied up in a mandatory administrative holding pattern for the holiday weekend. I laughed loudly, the sound sharp and unforgiving. A holding pattern, I asked. Is that what we are calling the staging company fee, the premium catering bill for this ridiculous party, and the non-refundable $50,000 down payment you just placed on that brand new Porsche Carrera sitting out in my driveway? Mr. Henderson whipped his head around to stare at me, absolute shock registering on his face. I tapped the iPad one final time, changing the screen to show the outgoing transactions from the Apex Realty account over the last 24 hours. He cannot wire your money back, Mr. Henderson, I stated clearly, looking the wealthy investor right in the eye. Because as of 9 o'clock this morning, Jamal has already spent $140,000 of your cash, trying to look like a millionaire. Your earnest money is gone. Mr. Henderson let out a sound that was half roar and half gasp. He turned his back on my entire family in disgust. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his smartphone, and aggressively dialed a number. The room was paralyzed as we all listened to the phone ring on speaker. "Get me the litigation team." Mr. Henderson barked into the phone the second his assistant answered. "Yes, right now. I do not care that it is Christmas Eve. I want a team of federal litigators on the line in 5 minutes, and I want you to connect me directly to the regional director of the FBI field office. I am standing in a room with a thief." The heavy silence following Mr. Henderson's demand for the FBI shattered into a million pieces. Jamal visibly swayed his knees, buckling slightly as he gripped the edge of the marble island to keep from collapsing. The color had completely drained from his face, leaving a sickly ashen gray behind. Brittany let out a high, piercing shriek, finally realizing that her luxury lifestyle was evaporating before her very eyes. My mother stood frozen, her jaw unhinged, while my father took a frantic step toward the front door, looking as though he might actually sprint into the snow to escape the incoming federal agents. Before anyone could make another move, fingers like iron clamps closed around my right bicep. I gasped in surprise as Tyler violently jerked me backward. He did not ask or negotiate. He pulled with the frantic, uncoordinated strength of a drowning man. He dragged me away from the kitchen island, his expensive leather shoes slipping against the imported rug as he pulled me into the dimly lit hallway leading to the guest bedrooms. "Let go of me," I demanded, planting my snow boots firmly into the hardwood floor to stop our momentum. Tyler slammed me against the hallway wall, his chest heaving as he gasped for air. Up close, the illusion of my successful golden boy older brother completely disintegrated. His designer tie was askew. Sweat poured freely down his forehead, matting his perfectly styled hair against his skin. His breath smelled strongly of stale whiskey and sheer, unadulterated panic. The arrogant sneer he had worn his entire life was gone, replaced by the wide, terrified eyes of a trapped animal. "Alyssa, you have to stop this right now!" Tyler hissed, his voice cracking into a high-pitched whine. "You have to go back in there and tell Henderson it was a mistake. Tell him you approved the transfer. Tell him anything to get him off the phone." I stared at him, my expression entirely flat. "You want me to confess to federal wire fraud to save Jamal? Are you completely out of your mind?" "It is not about Jamal," Tyler cried out, his hands flying up to grip his own hair, pulling at the roots. "It is about me. Alyssa, you do not understand what is happening. You have no idea the kind of trouble I am in right now." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a frantic, shaking whisper. "The consulting firm did not just go bankrupt. I borrowed money to try and keep it afloat. I borrowed a lot of money from people who do not use banks. People who do not send collection letters. I owe $100,000, Alyssa. I owe it by the end of this month. If I do not pay them, they are going to kill me. They know where I live. They know where my car is parked." I crossed my arms over my chest, watching his total emotional meltdown with clinical detachment. "And what exactly does your dangerous gambling debt have to do with my property, Tyler?" He swallowed hard, tears actually spilling over his eyelashes and tracking through the sweat on his cheeks. "Jamal promised me a cut. When he suggested we use the old power of attorney to sell the cabin, he promised me $150,000 from the proceeds today. It was the only way out. It was a perfect plan until you showed up and ruined it. You have to fix this. You have a high salary, you have to save me. Just pay them off. You have the money." A hot, searing wave of anger burned through my veins, incinerating the last remaining shred of sibling loyalty I possessed. I reached up and violently yanked my arm away from his lingering grasp. I pushed him back, driving the heel of my hand into his chest hard enough to make him stumble against the opposite wall. "Save you?" I asked, my voice dropping to a lethal quiet register. "Like last year when I was in the hospital recovering from surgery, and you couldn't pick me up because you had a poker tournament. I laid in that recovery room for 6 hours, waiting for my big brother to show up. The nurses had to wheel me out to a taxi while I was still bleeding and heavily medicated because you turned your phone off to play cards. You left me there completely alone." Tyler raised his trembling hands, shaking his head back and forth. "Alyssa, that was different. I did not know it was that serious. I was on a winning streak." I stepped right into his space, forcing him to look me in the eye. "You knew exactly how serious it was. Just like you knew exactly what you were doing today. You're the one who told Mom to give me the wrong date for Christmas, just so you could steal my house to pay your gambling debts. You plan to lock me out of my own property, sell it out from under me, and pocket the cash to save your own skin. You sold out your own sister for 100 grand. Alyssa, please, he begged, sliding slowly down the wall until he was practically kneeling on the floorboards. I am your brother. They are going to hurt me. You stopped being my brother the second you put my signature on a fraudulent deed. I replied, my tone devoid of any sympathy or warmth. I am not your personal ATM, Tyler, and I am certainly not your human shield. You made this bed with criminals, and now you get to lie in it. I turned my back on his sobbing, pathetic form and marched back down the hallway toward the great room. The festive holiday atmosphere was dead and buried. Mr. Henderson was still shouting orders into his phone, demanding swift federal intervention. Brittany was desperately shaking Jamal by the shoulders, screaming at him to explain where the money went. My parents were huddled together near the Christmas tree, looking absolutely terrified of the storm that had just broken inside my house. I walked past all of them, heading straight for the massive entertainment center, dominating the far wall of the living room. My mother had rented a state-of-the-art audiovisual system for this closing party, complete with an enormous 85-inch smart television, meant to display glossy, highly edited photos of the property to impress the buyer. I unlocked my iPad, navigated to the screen mirroring settings, and connected directly to the television's open wireless network. The giant screen flickered for a second, replacing a slideshow of snow-covered pine trees with my live desktop display. I stood in front of the fireplace, holding my iPad like a weapon. I cleared my throat, projecting my voice to command the attention of every single person in the room. The screaming instantly stopped. Mr. Henderson lowered his phone. My parents turned to stare at the massive screen illuminating the room in harsh blue digital light. Since we are having a family meeting, I announced, tapping a heavy encrypted file on my screen. Let's look at the books. The massive 85-inch screen flickered instantly, transitioning from my home screen to a highly organized dashboard of financial tracking software. A collective gasp rippled through the catering staff and the remaining guests, who had been too paralyzed by the unfolding drama to sneak out the front door. Mr. Henderson remained anchored to his spot, his phone pressed tightly to his ear, explicitly narrating every single thing he saw on the screen to the federal authorities on the other end of the line. I swiped my finger across the smooth glass of my tablet. A brilliantly color-coded timeline expanded across the giant television. This is the anatomy of a desperate crime. I narrated, my voice echoing off the stone walls with clinical precision. On the left, we have Jamal. Yesterday morning, he successfully diverted Mr. Henderson's $300,000 wire transfer into his personal offshore shell company. By noon, Jamal had already begun desperately bleeding the account dry to maintain the illusion of his fake luxury lifestyle. I highlighted a series of red outbound arrows on the screen. $50,000 wired directly to a luxury auto dealership in Reno for a down payment on a Porsche, I read aloud. $10,000 wired to the caterers standing in this very room. $5,000 for the rented staging furniture my mother is currently leaning against. Jamal was completely broke. He needed this fake closing just to keep the lights on and stop his leased cars from being repossessed. Jamal slumped against the kitchen island, his face buried in his hands. Brittany was staring at the scene, her mouth hanging open. The reality of her husband's absolute financial ruin finally breaking through her meticulously crafted delusions. But to scam of this magnitude requires an inside man. I continued, swiping to the next slide. Enter my older brother Tyler. A new web of financial ruin materialized on the screen. This one, a chaotic mess of offshore betting sites, high-interest payday loans, and untraceable wire transfers. Tyler let out a pathetic whimper from the hallway, sliding down the wall until he was curled in a miserable ball on the hardwood floor. Tyler is a severe gambling addict, I stated, offering zero sympathy as the numbers flashed in bold crimson letters for everyone to read. Over the last 8 months, he has accumulated exactly $112,000 in illicit debt. He owes money to people who break legs and burn down houses for a living. They gave him a hard deadline of December 25th to produce the cash. I walked toward the center of the room, commanding the space entirely. So the two golden boys of the family hatched a brilliant foolproof plan, I explained. Tyler knew I would be traveling out of state for an audit. He convinced my parents to give me the wrong date for the family Christmas gathering, ensuring the cabin would be completely empty. Jamal, armed with an old, legally revoked power of attorney, listed my house off-market at a severely discounted rate to guarantee a lightning-fast cash closing. They planned to split the stolen earnest money payoff Tyler's loan sharks and let Jamal play the role of the wealthy real estate mogul. It was the perfect trap, built entirely on the assumption that I was too stupid and too passive to catch them in time. "Shut it off!" a voice roared from the back of the room. My father Richard suddenly charged forward like an enraged bull. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. He shoved violently past a waiter, knocking a silver tray of champagne flutes to the floor with a deafening crash. He lunged behind the massive entertainment center, his hands frantically tearing at the thick bundles of cables and wires, desperate to kill the power to the television. "Turn this off right now, Alyssa!" Richard screamed, his voice raw and echoing with authoritarian rage. "Family matters stay strictly private. You do not air our dirty laundry in front of strangers. You are humiliating us. You have made your point, now shut this damn thing down before I smash it to pieces." I yanked it hard on a thick black cord. A soundbar crashed to the floor, but the massive screen remained brightly lit, powered by an outlet he could not reach. He stood up, chest heaving, glaring at me with the same terrifying, domineering anger that had kept me quiet and compliant for my entire childhood. But I was no longer a frightened child, and his anger meant absolutely nothing to me anymore. "Private?" I asked, my voice slicing through his outrage like a freshly sharpened scalpel. "Family matters stay strictly private, Dad. I suppose that is the exact same twisted logic you used when you decided to treat my credit score like a family slush fund." I did not wait for his response. I firmly tapped the screen of my iPad, advancing to the final, most devastating slide of my presentation. The complex webs of Jamal and Tyler's crimes vanished, replaced by a stark, terrifyingly clear spreadsheet. Richard froze. The aggressive, domineering posture melted away, instantly replaced by a stark, horrifying panic. My mother let out a sharp gasp, her hands flying up to cover her mouth as she stared at the television screen in absolute terror. "Private," I repeated, stepping closer to my father until he was forced to look me in the eye. "Like the 3 different platinum credit cards you and Mom secretly opened in my name 2 years ago." The enormous screen displayed a total balance in bold, unforgiving text. $80,000 in severely defaulted high-interest debt. Below the total was an itemized line-by-line breakdown of every single fraudulent purchase. "You used my social security number," I declared, my voice echoing with a furious, righteous clarity. "You completely forged my signature. You committed felony identity theft against your own daughter. And what did you buy with my stolen credit, Dad? Did you pay for life-saving medical treatments? Did you save the family home from foreclosure?" I gestured sharply toward the screen, forcing everyone in the room to read the itemized list of their luxurious stolen lifestyle. "No," I stated, answering my own question. "You bought Mom 3 different authentic Birkin bags. You paid for Brittany's lavish all-inclusive bachelorette party in Cabo. You funded Tyler's ridiculous high-end golf club memberships. You actively destroyed my financial future, tanked my credit score to a pathetic level, and risked sending me to federal prison, all to maintain the fake, pathetic illusion that you were still wealthy socialites. You committed identity theft to buy Mom's designer bags and fund Brittany's lavish lifestyle." Mr. Henderson, still holding his phone to his ear, stepped forward. He looked at my parents, then at Jamal, his face a mask of total disgust. He spoke clearly into his phone, his voice carrying absolute authority. "Yes, Agent Miller. Add multiple counts of aggravated identity theft to the immediate wire fraud charges. I have the suspects securely contained in the room with me, and I am looking at the physical evidence right now. Send the squad cars up the mountain." The click of Mr. Henderson ending his phone call sounded like a judge's gavel slamming down in an empty, echoing courtroom. The absolute finality of his words hung suspended in the chilled air of the great room. Squad cars, federal litigators. The abstract threat of colored cells on a spreadsheet had suddenly materialized into the very real immediate prospect of handcuffs and federal prison sentences. Jamal let out a pathetic, high-pitched whimper, burying his face deeper into his trembling hands as he remained slumped against the kitchen island. In the hallway, Tyler was curled into a miserable ball on the hardwood floor, rocking back and forth as he muttered about loan sharks. Behind the massive television, my father stood entirely paralyzed. The thick bundle of audio cables slipped from his sweat-slicked fingers, hitting the floorboards with a dull thud. His chest heaved beneath his cashmere sweater, his eyes darting frantically toward the large bay windows, as if he expected to see flashing red and blue lights cutting through the heavy blizzard right that very second. The catering staff, previously frozen in shock, slowly began backing away toward the kitchen, desperate to distance themselves from an active federal crime scene. It was in this moment of suffocating absolute terror that my mother realized her usual tactics of aggression, belittlement, and authoritarian rage were completely useless. Intimidation works on a compliant, terrified daughter, but it does absolutely nothing against a federal wire fraud investigation and a multi-thousand-dollar identity theft case. So Patricia Wilson executed a flawless, instantaneous tactical pivot. Cornered by undeniable proof, she switched to the only weapon she had left. Her knees hit the polished hardwood floor with a heavy, deliberate thud. She threw her head back, letting out a raw, guttural sob that echoed violently off the vaulted wooden ceilings. It was a masterful performance of sheer hysteria designed to suck all the remaining oxygen out of the room and center all the attention squarely on her suffering. "Alyssa," she wailed, her voice cracking perfectly as she crawled forward on her hands and knees. Her expensive silk blouse dragged against the floor, but she did not care. She reached out her manicured hands, grasping desperately at the hem of my winter coat. "Alyssa, my baby, my sweet girl, please. You have to listen to me." I looked down at the woman who had spent my entire life making me feel small, invisible, and inadequate. I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no guilt, no lingering childhood desire to comfort her. I calmly took a deliberate step backward, pulling my coat completely out of her frantic grasp. "Do not touch me," I said, my voice dead and flat. My mother let out another hysterical sob, collapsing forward, so her forehead nearly touched the floorboards in front of the remaining party guests and Mr. Henderson. "I gave birth to you," she screamed, the sound tearing from her throat in a ragged theatrical screech. "How can you do this to your own flesh and blood? We only took those cards because we were trying to keep up appearances for your father's business. We're your family." She looked up at me, mascara running down her cheeks in dark, jagged rivers, her eyes wide with manufactured terror. "You do not understand the pressure we were under, Alyssa." She babbled, her words tumbling over each other in a desperate, breathless rush. "Your father's firm was struggling so badly. The industry changed, clients left, and we were drowning. But if anyone at the country club found out, if the board members smelled blood in the water, the whole business would have collapsed instantly. We had to maintain our status. We had to keep attending the galas, hosting the dinners, wearing the right clothes. It was for survival. We did it for the family. We just needed a little bridge loan to get us through the rough patch, and we knew you had perfect credit." I stared at her, kneeling on the floor, surrounded by the rented luxury staging furniture they had procured to sell my house out from under me. "A bridge loan," I repeated, my tone dropping to a glacial whisper. I turned slightly, pointing a firm finger at the glowing 85-inch screen still casting my financial audit. The bright yellow highlighted rows of credit card statements glared back at us, an undeniable digital reckoning. "You maxed out 3 different platinum cards in my name," I stated, systematically destroying her excuse with cold, hard facts. "You racked up $80,000 in high-interest debt and let it go to collections. Do you have any idea what that did to my life?" I had to sit in a windowless room at the FBI field office for 6 hours, explaining to federal background investigators why my credit score had plummeted. I almost lost my security clearance. I almost lost my entire career because of your pathetic lies. I took a slow, menacing step toward where Brittany was standing, frozen by the fireplace. "And let us be perfectly clear about what you were buying to save the family business," I said, my eyes locking onto my sister's wrist. Brittany flinched instinctively, pulling her left arm behind her back, but she was too slow. "Look at the screen, Brittany," I commanded, my voice sharp as a whip. "December 14th of last year, A $12,000 charge at the flagship jewelry boutique downtown. I turned my gaze back to my mother, staring down at her coldly. You did not buy groceries to survive, Mom. You did not pay the firm's electricity bill. You bought authentic Birkin bags. You paid for first-class tickets to Mexico. Family doesn't steal their daughter's credit to buy her sister a Rolex. Brittany let out a choked gasp, burying her face in her hands as Mr. Henderson stared at her wrist in pure revulsion. My father closed his eyes, leaning his head back against the entertainment center in total defeat. My mother scrambled forward again, her hands grasping empty air as I stepped out of her reach once more. She looked frantically toward Mr. Henderson, who was watching the pathetic display with unyielding disgust. She realized the identity theft was just one part of the avalanche about to bury them. The federal wire fraud Jamal had committed was the immediate threat, the one bringing the police up the mountain right now. "We will fix it!" My mother shrieked, her voice reaching a frantic pitch of absolute panic. She clasped her hands together in a prayer position, aiming her begging directly at me, then at the wealthy investor. "We'll give Mr. Henderson his money back," she promised blindly, completely ignoring the fact that I had just proven Jamal had already spent half of it trying to look rich. "We will pull the funds from somewhere. We will take out a second mortgage. We will sell the cars. We'll cancel the sale. You can keep the house, Alyssa. It is yours. We will transfer the deed back to you immediately. Just please drop this." The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Patricia's desperate theatrical sobbing hitched in her throat. She looked up from the hardwood floor, her tear-streaked face frozen in a mask of pathetic, calculated hope. The entire great room held its collective breath. The crackle of the massive stone fireplace was the only sound breaking the suffocating silence. In the hallway, Tyler had stopped rocking, his terrified eyes locked on me. Brittany held her breath, her hands clutching her designer dress. My father stared unblinking from behind the entertainment center. They were all waiting for the old Alyssa to emerge. They expected the compliant traditional family scapegoat to crack under the pressure of my mother's public humiliation. They fully expected me to reach down, pull the woman who had abused my credit to her feet, and frantically try to negotiate with Mr. Henderson to call off the federal agents. They honestly believed that my deeply ingrained desire for family harmony would override my own self-preservation. I did not move a single muscle to help her. I looked down at her kneeling figure, taking in the absolute ruin of her perfectly curated socialite facade. Slowly, deliberately, I tapped the power button on my iPad. The massive 85-inch screen behind my father went completely black, plunging the room back into the warm, dim glow of the firelight. I closed the leather cover of the tablet and calmly tucked it under my arm. The methodical click of the magnetic case echoed sharply. "Cancel the sale," I repeated, letting her desperate plea roll around in the quiet room. I looked at my mother, then shifted my gaze to my father, and finally to Jamal. "You actually think you have the power to cancel anything today? You think you can just hand me back a forged deed return, Mr. Henderson his stolen cash, and we all go back to pretending we are a wealthy, happy family?" Patricia reached out again, her voice dropping to a raspy, frantic whisper. "Yes, we will make it right, Alyssa. We promise. You love this cabin. It was your grandfather's gift. We know how much it means to you. We were desperate, but we will not take it from you. You can keep your house." I stared down at my mother, a chilling, absolute calm washing over my entire body. I stepped backward, severing the final invisible string that had kept me tied to their toxic approval for 32 years. "You think I came here to stop you from selling my house?" I asked, my voice ringing with absolute clarity. Patricia blinked, her hands falling to her sides as confusion pierced through her panic. "What?" she stammered, looking up at me blankly. I smiled, a chilling, triumphant smile. "Mom, it is too late. I cannot keep this house because I already sold it." The confusion in the room rapidly mutated into absolute bewilderment. Mr. Henderson paused, lowering his phone slightly, his brow furrowing in surprise. Jamal scrambled to his feet, gripping the edge of the marble island so hard his knuckles turned white. "That is impossible," Jamal choked out, his voice cracking violently. "I checked the county registry yesterday morning. The deed was still securely in your name. I filed the transfer paperwork an hour before this party started." You filed fraudulent paperwork on a secondary county database using a legally revoked power of attorney. I corrected him smoothly, enjoying the sheer terror spreading across his face. But if you were an actual professional instead of a desperate con artist, you would know that high-value commercial sales are processed through the state capitol's expedited corporate registry. I turned to address the entire room, ensuring every single one of them understood the absolute magnitude of their failure. The second I received an automated alert 3 weeks ago that someone was trying to access the property tax records, I knew exactly what you were planning, I explained. I knew Tyler was drowning in illicit debt. I knew Mom and Dad had destroyed my credit and were facing ruin. And I knew Jamal was desperate enough to try and liquidate my only asset to fund Brittany's delusions. My father stepped out from behind the dark television, his face completely pale, his hands shaking. What did you do, Alyssa? I called a premier luxury resort developer based out of Aspen. I stated clearly, watching the blood drain completely from Brittany's face. They have been trying to buy this entire mountain ridge for a decade to build a private ski lodge. When I told them I was ready to sell, they bypassed the local county entirely. We closed the deal privately, legally, and permanently in federal court 4 days ago. They paid 3 times the market value and they wired the funds directly into an unbreachable high-yield trust account that none of you can ever touch. Tyler let out a guttural, agonizing scream from the hallway, slamming his fists against the floorboards. No, you cannot have done that. The loan sharks, Alyssa. They want their money today. Then you better start packing a bag. Tyler, I replied without an ounce of pity, because there is absolutely no money here to save you. I turned my attention back to Jamal, who looked like he was about to physically vomit onto the pristine kitchen island. Do you understand what that means for you, Jamal? You did not just forge a document to sell a house owned by your sister-in-law. You accepted a $300,000 wire transfer across state lines for a property that is currently legally owned by a multi-billion-dollar corporate holding firm. You defrauded Mr. Henderson, and you attempted to defraud a ruthless corporate entity equipped with an army of federal litigators. Mr. Henderson let out a sharp, booming laugh that startled everyone. It was not a sound of amusement, but of cold, vindictive satisfaction. He pointed a thick finger directly at Jamal. You are going to a federal penitentiary for a very, very long time, son. Patricia scrambled to her feet, abandoning her tears as pure, unfiltered venom took over. The pathetic victim act vanished the exact second she realized there was no money left to salvage. You vindictive, selfish little witch! My mother hissed, her face contorting with an ugly, desperate rage. You sold a multi-million-dollar property and kept every single penny for yourself, while your own family is facing bankruptcy and prison. You set us up. I did not set you up. I countered, my voice easily cutting through her screaming. I simply let you walk blindly into your own trap. You assumed I was weak. You assumed I would stay quiet to keep the peace. You relied on my silence to fund your luxurious illusions. You thought I was a glorified calculator, but you forgot that I track criminals for a living. The heavy sound of chain tires crunching against the packed snow echoed loudly from the long driveway outside. The rhythmic, sweeping reflection of red and blue lights began to dance across the frosted bay windows, painting the dark room in the undeniable colors of consequence. Brittany ran to the window, letting out a terrified, breathy wail as she peered out into the blizzard. They are here, she cried, backing away from the glass. The police are here. I pulled my winter coat tighter around my shoulders, adjusting the strap of my bag as I walked calmly toward the heavy oak front door. I looked back at my family one last time. They were surrounded by rented furniture they could not afford inside a house they no longer owned, waiting for authorities they could not escape. Goodbye, Mom, I said, reaching for the brass doorknob. Have fun keeping up appearances. I turned the brass knob. The latch clicked loudly, and a thin slice of freezing mountain wind rushed into the stifling heat of the great room. But before I could pull the heavy oak door open, Jamal's panicked, cracking voice stopped me in my tracks. What? Jamal stammered, lunging away from the marble kitchen island. His arms flailed wildly as if he could physically grab the words right out of the air. To who? You cannot just sell a property like this without going through a licensed broker. There are procedures, there are listings. You are lying. You have to be lying. I let go of the brass doorknob. The heavy door swung shut with a solid echoing thud, sealing them all inside their own nightmare. I turned around and walked slowly back to the center of the room, my winter boots stepping carefully around my mother, who was still crumpled on the hardwood floor in her designer clothes. I did not look at Jamal immediately. Instead, I pointed past him, directing everyone's attention toward the massive floor-to-ceiling bay windows framing the back of the great room. The blizzard was raging outside, but through the swirling white snow, you could clearly see the dense, untouched acres of towering pine trees stretching aggressively up the mountain ridge. I didn't need a broker, I stated, keeping my tone perfectly level as I watched Jamal's chest heave with panic. The Aspen Sierra Eco Resort Corporation approached me directly last month. They didn't care about your rented leather sofas or your premium champagne tower. They did not care about the cabin itself at all. They wanted the zoning rights and the unhindered access to the northern ridge. They bought the land for $4 million in cash. The number detonated in the room like a physical shockwave. $4 million. Tyler abruptly stopped his pathetic rocking in the hallway. He scrambled up onto his knees, his tear-streaked face suddenly illuminated by a desperate, sick kind of hope. Brittany physically staggered backward, bumping into the catered buffet table. A momentary flash of pure, unadulterated greed instantly overrode the terror in her eyes. Even my mother pulled herself up by the arm of the rented sofa, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to process the sheer magnitude of that amount. $4 million! Brittany gasped, stepping forward and completely ignoring the federal investor standing just feet away. Alyssa, you have $4 million. You can fix this. You can pay Tyler's debt right now. You can clear the credit cards. You can pay Mr. Henderson back. We are your family. You have enough money to save all of us. I looked at my sister, marveling at the absolute delusion that allowed her to transition from screaming insults to begging for cash in less than 5 minutes. You truly do not hear a single word I say, I replied, my voice dropping to a glacial, unforgiving whisper. That money went straight into a locked, irrevocable corporate trust. I set it up specifically so that not a single penny could ever be attached to my personal identity, which means your fraudulent credit cards cannot touch it, and federal asset forfeiture cannot touch it. You are getting absolutely nothing. Tyler let out a devastated wail, collapsing back onto the floorboards as the reality of his impending doom settled heavily over him once again. Jamal looked like he was going to pass out, his eyes darting frantically between me and Mr. Henderson, who was watching the entire exchange with a grim, satisfied expression. My father, Richard, had been standing frozen behind the entertainment center this entire time. Now he stepped out into the open, his face a terrifying shade of crimson. The veins in his neck bulged against his cashmere collar. He looked at the lavish spread of food, the expensive ice sculptures melting slowly on the tables, and the terrified waitstaff cowering near the kitchen entrance. If the house was already sold, Richard demanded, his voice shaking with a terrifying, contained rage. If you already signed the deed and had millions of dollars sitting safely in a bank account, then why the hell did you let us do this? He threw his arms out wide, gesturing to the entire elaborate setup. Why let Jamal bring a buyer here? Richard yelled, spit flying from his lips. Why let us spend money we do not have to throw a massive closing party for a deal that was never going to happen? You let your mother run up thousands of dollars in catering and staging fees today. You stood there and watched us celebrate. You let us walk right into a federal trap. Why didn't you just tell us the property was gone the second you walked through the door? The sheer entitlement of his outrage was breathtaking. He was not angry that they had committed felonies. He was angry that I had not stopped them from getting caught. I looked around the room, making eye contact with each of the people who had spent my entire life treating me like a disposable asset. I looked at Tyler, trembling in fear of his loan sharks. I looked at Brittany, mourning her fake luxury life. I looked at Jamal, facing decades in federal prison. And I looked at my parents, whose entire social standing was about to be obliterated by multiple counts of identity theft. I slowly pulled back the thick wool sleeve of my winter coat, exposing my wrist. I stared down at the watch face, watching the second hand tick methodically forward. I let you throw the party today because of the specific terms of the handover contract, I said, looking back up with a chilling, triumphant smile. I calmly unzipped the side pocket of my leather portfolio. The sharp sound of the metal zipper cutting through the heavy silence made Brittany flinch, as if she had been struck. I pulled out a thick stack of legal documents, the top page stamped with the unmistakable, heavily embossed gold seal of a federal notary. I tossed the packet onto the marble kitchen island. It landed with a heavy, resounding slap right next to Jamal's trembling hand. He yanked his arm back instantly, staring at the paper as if it were radioactive. "Read it!" I commanded, my voice echoing sharply off the vaulted ceilings. "Read the highlighted section on page 4, Jamal. Since you consider yourself such a high-end real estate expert, you should truly appreciate the airtight legality of a corporate handover." Jamal simply stared at the document, completely paralyzed by fear, his mouth opening and closing without producing a single sound. My father, his face still flushed a dangerous shade of crimson, aggressively snatched the packet from the counter. His eyes darted rapidly across the thick legal jargon, his lips moving silently until he reached the bright yellow highlight. He stopped breathing. The heavy parchment began to shake violently in his hands. "What does it say, Richard?" my mother demanded, her voice shrill and grating. "What did she do?" He could not even speak. He just stared at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of pure horror and genuine disbelief. "Since my father seems to have lost his voice, I will explain it to you," I said, taking a slow, measured step toward the center of the room. "Aspen Sierra did not want this house. They do not care about your custom stone fireplace or the imported hardwood floors. They only wanted the land to build their new ski lift terminal, so I sold it to them with a strict demolition clause." The word demolition hung in the freezing air, heavy and fatal. Brittany let out a confused, breathy gasp. "Demolition? What does that mean? What are you talking about?" I turned my gaze to my father, my eyes locking onto his terrified expression. I remembered standing in his home office 10 years ago, holding my college acceptance letter, while he told my mother I lacked the famous Wilson charm. I remembered him laughing and dismissing my financial advice when I warned him about his risky, over-leveraged investments. "For 32 years you told everyone who would listen that I lacked vision," I stated, throwing his own deeply ingrained insults right back at him. "You told Mom I was too analytical, too detached from the real world. You called me a cold, calculating machine every single time I pointed out a fatal flaw in your pathetic business plans." I smiled, feeling a deep, radiating satisfaction warming my chest. Well, the machine read the fine print. I stepped closer to the island, tapping a finger forcefully against the stack of papers. "The contract stipulates a zero liability handover. Aspen Sierra assumes absolute ownership of the property and the physical land at exactly 5 p.m. today. The clause explicitly states that any unapproved personal property, temporary fixtures, or staging equipment remaining inside the structure at the time of handover will be considered abandoned debris. The demolition crew is legally authorized to dispose of it all at their complete discretion." Jamal let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. He looked frantically around the massive great room. His eyes darted from the imported Italian leather sectional sofas to the towering crystal light fixtures he had installed just for today. He stared at the 85-inch screen and the expensive modern art hanging on the walls. "The staging furniture," Jamal whispered, his voice cracking wildly. "Alyssa, you cannot do this. We rented all of this under Tyler's name. The staging company contract says we are liable for full retail value if anything is damaged or destroyed. It is over $150,000 worth of inventory. We do not have that kind of money." Tyler, who was still slumped on the floor in the hallway, let out a tortured groan, curled himself into a tighter ball, and began pulling his own hair in sheer panic. "That sounds like a catastrophic lack of due diligence on your part, Jamal," I replied evenly, offering absolutely no sympathy. "Perhaps you should have verified the legal deed before signing a binding financial agreement for a property you did not actually own." My mother finally grasped the full, devastating reality of the situation. Her eyes widened in pure, unfiltered panic as she looked toward the front hall closet. "My mink coats are in there!" Patricia shrieked, her voice reaching an unbearable screeching pitch. "My authentic designer luggage is in the master bedroom. We have $50,000 worth of catered food and premium alcohol sitting right here in the kitchen." "Then I highly suggest you start carrying it out to your least luxury vehicles," I advised her coldly, "because the corporate demolition crew does not care about your designer labels." To them, your mink coats are just more trash to haul to the local dump. Richard slammed the documents back down onto the counter. You cannot legally allow them to destroy our property, he roared, trying desperately to reclaim his lost authority. We will sue you. We will sue Aspen Sierra. We will drag you through civil court for millions. I laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound that completely silenced his rant. You are going to sue a multi-billion-dollar corporation while simultaneously facing a federal indictment for wire fraud and identity theft. I would absolutely love to see you try, Dad. I am sure the federal prosecutors will be fascinated by your aggressive legal strategy. I checked my watch, watching the second-hand sweep precisely across the dial. The property must be completely vacated by unauthorized personnel by 5 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, I announced, my voice echoing through the silent, terrified room. It is currently 4:58. You have exactly 2 minutes to grab whatever you can physically carry and get off corporate property. No one moved. They were completely paralyzed by the sheer, overwhelming magnitude of their total defeat. The catered waitstaff, however, had heard enough. Without a single word, the servers dropped their silver trays, abandoned the champagne flutes, and sprinted toward the back exit, desperate to escape the impending disaster and avoid any legal liability. Alyssa, please, Brittany begged, tears finally streaming down her face, ruining her meticulous makeup as she ran toward me. You have to stop them. Give us more time. We need to call a moving truck. We cannot lose all this. I looked at my sister, feeling completely detached from her manufactured tears. You ran out of time the second you stole my identity to buy a watch, Brittany. Before anyone else could scream, beg, or hurl another hollow threat, a strange vibration began to resonate through the freezing air. It started as a faint tremor in the walls, barely noticeable over the howling blizzard outside. But then a low mechanical rumbling began to shake the heavy hardwood floorboards of the cabin beneath our feet. The crystal glasses on the catering tables started to rattle violently against each other, clinking in a frantic, chaotic rhythm. It was getting louder. The heavy vibration traveled up through the soles of my boots, a deep, guttural thrumming that felt like an earthquake localized entirely beneath our family's feet. The crystal champagne flutes on the marble island jittered wildly, several tipping over and shattering against the floor. The remaining stragglers from the catered waitstaff did not even look back. They shoved past my paralyzed father, threw open the heavy oak front door, and scrambled out into the raging blizzard, desperate to escape the impending collateral damage. Brittany let out a terrified, high-pitched shriek. She spun away from me, her expensive silk dress whipping around her legs, and bolted toward the massive floor-to-ceiling bay windows framing the front driveway. She pressed her hands flat against the frosted glass, wiping away the condensation with frantic, jerky motions. Her breath hitched violently. They are not snowplows, she screamed, her voice cracking with sheer panic. My father pushed himself away from the entertainment center, his previous bravado completely evaporating as he rushed to join her at the glass. I stood my ground in the center of the kitchen, watching the chaotic scene unfold exactly as I had orchestrated it. Through the swirling white curtain of the blizzard, the enormous, menacing silhouettes of heavy machinery materialized. Two massive, heavy-duty industrial bulldozers roared up the winding mountain driveway. Their thick steel tracks crushed the packed snow, effortlessly spewing thick columns of black diesel smoke into the pristine winter air. Emblazoned on their bright yellow sides was the bold, unmistakable logo of the Aspen Sierra Eco Resort Corporation. But it was not just the demolition crew arriving. Trailing closely behind the monstrous bulldozers were 3 marked county sheriff's cruisers. Their aggressive red and blue emergency lights sliced through the blinding snow, casting rapid, dizzying colors across the walls of the great room. The flashing lights reflected off the rented crystal chandeliers, turning the luxurious staging decor into the backdrop of a localized crime scene. Tyler scrambled backward on the hardwood floor, his boots slipping as he hit the base of the staircase. He clutched his chest, his breathing turning into rapid, shallow gasps. The police, he choked out, his eyes wide with a frantic, hunted terror. The cops are here. The loan sharks must have tipped them off about the wire fraud. They are going to arrest us. They are going to lock us up. He curled his body inward, completely consumed by a full-blown panic attack. He was hyperventilating so hard his shoulders shook violently. My mother, Patricia, did not even look in his direction. Her youngest son was actively collapsing from absolute terror, yet her eyes remained entirely fixated on a pile of designer coats draped over the entryway bench. Her maternal instincts had always been completely overridden by her materialistic greed. She scrambled toward the coats, prioritizing her authentic mink over her gasping son. Brittany turned away from the window, her face a mask of smeared makeup and pure desperation. She lunged toward me, her manicured fingers clawing at the air. "Alyssa, you have to stop them!" she screamed, her voice echoing shrilly over the mechanical roar outside. "Go out there right now and tell the sheriffs there has been a mistake. Tell them the handover is cancelled. You are our sister. You cannot just let them tear down the house with all our rented furniture inside. We will owe hundreds of thousands of dollars. We will be ruined." I did not flinch. I did not take a single step backward. I looked my sister dead in the eyes, feeling a profound, absolute sense of liberation. "There is no mistake, Brittany," I stated clearly, my voice slicing through the rising panic in the room. "And I am not stopping anything." Jamal pushed himself off the kitchen island, his face slick with cold sweat. He waved his phone frantically in the air, his thumb tapping the screen with aggressive shaking motions. "They cannot legally do this," Jamal yelled, trying to summon the arrogant, authoritative tone he had used to belittle me for years. It failed miserably. "You cannot just demolish an occupied residential property. It requires a massive legal procedure. It requires formal notice. We never received a single warning. I check the mail every day. I manage this property. I would know if an eviction was filed." I calmly reached into the side pocket of my leather portfolio and pulled out a small laminated green receipt. I held it up between my index and middle finger, letting the flashing blue police lights catch the glossy surface. "The eviction notice was officially served to this address 30 days ago," I stated, ensuring my voice carried over the rumbling engines outside. "A registered agent signed for the certified mail. I have the delivery confirmation right here." Jamal stared at the green slip, his mouth dropping open. A horrifying realization washed over his features, draining the last remaining drop of color from his face. I watched his arrogant facade completely crumble as the pieces clicked together in his mind. "I guess Jamal was too busy planning his commission to read the certified mail," I said, driving the final nail into his pathetic delusion. "You saw a thick legal envelope from a corporate holding firm and assumed it was just routine tax documents or boring bureaucratic nonsense. You threw it directly into the trash because it did not fit your grand, unearned vision of becoming a millionaire real estate tycoon. You ignored the fine print, Jamal. And now you are going to pay the ultimate price for your sheer staggering incompetence." Mr. Henderson, the wealthy investor, who had been watching the entire spectacular collapse from the corner of the room, silently buttoned his cashmere overcoat. He did not say a single word. He simply shot Jamal a look of absolute concentrated disgust, stepped around Patricia, who was frantically stuffing expensive silverware into her designer handbag, and walked out the back patio door. He was leaving them to face the federal consequences entirely on their own. Outside, the lead bulldozer dropped its massive steel blade. The heavy metal hit the frozen driveway with a horrific screeching grind that vibrated through the window panes. The sheriff's deputies stepped out of their cruisers, pulling their thick winter coats tight against the blizzard. They did not look like they were here to negotiate. They rested their hands casually on their utility belts, holding clipboards with court-ordered mandates. They were here to facilitate a corporate demolition, and they were fully prepared to drag trespassers out in handcuffs. My father finally snapped. He grabbed the brass handle of the front door, puffing his chest out as he prepared to use decades of wealthy country club privilege to order the police off the property. He truly believed his status could somehow override a federal mandate. "I wouldn't step out there demanding respect, Dad," I warned him coldly. "Because the second those deputies run Jamal's name for the wire fraud, they are taking all of you down to the precinct." Richard froze, his hand hovering over the doorknob. He looked back at me, finally realizing that his power, his authority, and his entire fabricated reality were completely gone. I checked the face of my watch, watching the second hand sweep precisely into place. "The handover time is exactly 1200 p.m., I announce. It is now 12:05. Exactly on cue. The massive oak front door did not just open. It was thrust inward with such violent force that the heavy brass handle slammed against the drywall, cracking the pristine white plaster. A brutal gust of sub-zero mountain wind ripped through the entryway, instantly extinguishing the roaring fire in the stone hearth and sending a flurry of paper cocktail napkins swirling into the air like chaotic indoor snow. 4 county sheriffs stomped into the great room. They were massive, imposing figures clad in heavy winter tactical gear, their thick boots tracking muddy slush across the imported Persian rugs Jamal had rented for his grand illusion. They spread out immediately, moving with a practiced military precision that instantly killed any remaining atmosphere of a high society gathering. Patricia did not miss a single beat. She saw a uniform and immediately weaponized her affluent suburban mother entitlement. She scrambled to her feet, smoothing down her ruined silk blouse, and marched directly toward the tallest officer with her head held high. "Officer! Thank God you are here!" Patricia gasped, her voice trembling with a sickeningly perfect blend of manufactured relief and hysterical victimization. "You have to arrest that woman right now." She pointed a shaking manicured finger directly at my chest. "She is mentally unstable. She has hijacked our private family event. She is threatening to destroy our property. And she is deliberately trying to ruin our Christmas. I want her removed in handcuffs immediately." Richard stepped up right beside her, puffing out his chest in a pathetic display of lost authority. "I know the local police chief," he bellowed, his face still flushed a dangerous crimson. "This is a private, high-net-worth real estate closing. We are dealing with a disturbed family member who has locked us out of our own legal transaction. I want her escorted off this mountain before I make a phone call and have your badges taken away." The lead sheriff did not even blink. He did not look at my mother's fake tears, and he completely ignored my father's hollow, desperate threats. He simply brushed past them, his heavy boots crushing a fallen tray of expensive caviar directly into the hardwood floor. He walked straight past the trembling form of Tyler, bypassed a frozen Brittany, and stopped directly in front of me. He reached out a thick-gloved hand. "Miss Wilson," the lead sheriff said, his deep voice carrying a tone of absolute, unwavering respect. I shook his hand firmly. I had spent the last 3 weeks doing exactly what my family had always mocked me for. I was a cold, calculating machine. While Jamal was busy forging my signature, and Patricia was picking out floral arrangements on my stolen credit cards, I was sitting in a windowless conference room with this exact sheriff and a federal prosecutor mapping out this precise moment. I had provided them with the wire fraud IP addresses, the forged digital logs, and the undeniable proof of identity theft. I had coordinated the corporate handover to perfectly align with their tactical raid. "The perimeter is secured for demolition," the sheriff informed me, keeping his posture rigid and professional. "The Aspen Sierra heavy equipment crew is holding at the edge of the driveway, waiting for my signal to proceed." "Thank you, Sheriff," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly calm and even. "The corporate handover timeline is officially active. As the authorized representative for Aspen Sierra Y confirm that the structure is legally surrendered." The room went completely terrifyingly silent. The sound of the idling bulldozers outside vibrating against the window panes was the only noise left in the world. Patricia stared at the sheriff, her mouth hanging open so wide her jaw looked physically unhinged. "Why are you shaking her hand?" she shrieked, the polite, victimized facade completely shattering into raw, unadulterated panic. "She is trespassing. We are the ones hosting this event." The lead sheriff finally turned to look at my parents. His eyes were cold, professional, and entirely devoid of sympathy. "Ma'am, you are currently standing inside a structure owned by a private corporate entity," the sheriff stated, his voice booming over the mechanical roar outside. "Miss Wilson holds the legal proxy for the Aspen Sierra Corporation. We have been coordinating this demolition timeline with her legal team for the past 30 days to ensure a secure transition of the property. This structure is scheduled to be leveled in exactly 10 minutes. He looked around the room, taking in the rented leather sofas, the expensive catering stations, and the melted ice sculptures. "Any unauthorized personnel remaining inside this structure will be immediately arrested for criminal trespassing on a hazardous demolition site," the sheriff announced. "You have exactly 60 seconds to gather what you can physically carry and exit through the front door." Absolute chaos erupted. It was a spectacular, degrading display of sheer greed and survival instinct. Brittany let out a blood-curdling scream and dove toward the coat closet, physically shoving my mother out of the way to grab her designer handbags. Patricia shrieked, dropping to the floor to frantically scoop up bottles of premium champagne, stuffing them into her pockets like a common looter. Tyler did not move. He just remained curled on the floor, staring blankly at the ceiling, paralyzed by the knowledge that no amount of rented furniture could save him from the loan sharks waiting for him back in the city. Jamal, however, had a different plan. While my parents and sister were fighting over physical scraps of their fake wealth, stepping on each other's hands to grab winter coats, Jamal tried to slip away. He kept his head down, pressing his back against the wall as he slid toward the rear patio doors, desperate to escape into the blizzard and vanish before the authorities started asking questions about the forged deed and the missing $300,000. He reached for the glass handle, his fingers slipping on the condensation. "Not so fast," a sharp voice commanded. A deputy stepped out from the shadows of the kitchen hallway, physically blocking the exit. He placed a heavy hand on Jamal's chest, shoving him roughly back into the center of the great room. The lead sheriff watched the pathetic scramble with a look of absolute disgust. He stepped into the middle of the room, signaling his deputies. The remaining 3 officers immediately moved forward, blocking the front door, the hallway, and the kitchen entrance. The exits were entirely sealed. Patricia froze, a bottle of stolen wine slipping from her hands and shattering against the floorboards. Brittany dropped her handbags. Richard backed away, his hands raised in the air. "You told us to leave." Richard stammered, his voice weak and trembling as he looked at the blocked doors. "You said we had 60 seconds to exit the property." The lead sheriff turned his attention fully to the crowd, his posture shifting from a civil liaison to an active law enforcement officer. He did not look at the door. He looked directly at Jamal, then at my parents, and finally at Tyler. "I said unauthorized personnel need to vacate the premises," the sheriff corrected him, his voice echoing with brutal finality. "But none of you are going anywhere." The sheriff reached down to his thick leather duty belt. He unsnapped a small black pouch. The sharp metallic clink of heavy steel cut through the room like a gunshot. He pulled out a pair of solid metal handcuffs, letting them dangle and swing freely from his gloved fingers. "I am not just here to clear a building for an eviction," the sheriff announced, his eyes locking onto Jamal's terrified face. "We are executing multiple federal arrest warrants." The heavy steel of the handcuffs caught the flashing red and blue lights from outside as the lead sheriff took 2 massive, deliberate steps toward the kitchen island. He did not blink. He did not hesitate. He lunged forward, grabbing Jamal by the collar of his tailored Italian suit, spinning him around and slamming him face first against the marble countertop. Jamal let out a pathetic, breathless yelp as the cold stone hit his cheek. The sound of his rented Rolex scraping against the marble echoed through the silent room. Jamal Vance, the sheriff, bellowed, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling with absolute authority. "You are under arrest for interstate wire fraud, real estate scams, and grand larceny. You have the right to remain silent. I highly suggest you use it." The metallic click of the handcuffs ratcheting tightly around Jamal's wrists sounded like a vault door slamming shut. For a split second, the room was suspended in pure, unadulterated shock. My parents stood completely frozen, their arms still awkwardly clutching the expensive wine bottles and coats they had been trying to loot from the property. Tyler was whimpering in the corner, pressing his face against his knees. Then Brittany snapped. Her entire manufactured reality, the wealthy husband, the luxury cars, the endless bragging on social media, was being handcuffed and pinned to a kitchen counter. She let out a guttural, terrifying screech that sounded more animal than human. She sprinted across the hardwood floor, her expensive heels slipping wildly, and launched herself at the lead sheriff. "Get your hands off him!" Brittany shrieked, physically grabbing the sheriff's thick tactical sleeve and pulling with all her body weight. "Are you out of your mind? Do you know who we are? This is racial profiling. This is an illegal assault. My husband is an elite, high-net-worth businessman. He is closing a multi-million-dollar corporate deal today. You are going to lose your badge. I will personally see to it that you are sued into bankruptcy." The sheriff did not even flinch. He casually stepped to the side, breaking Brittany's frantic grip effortlessly. A secondary deputy immediately stepped forward, placing a heavy warning hand on Brittany's shoulder, pushing her firmly back toward the living area. Ma'am, if you touch a federal officer again, you will be joining him in the back of a cruiser for assaulting law enforcement. The deputy warned, his tone glacial. Brittany staggered backward, her chest heaving, her eyes wild with panic. She looked at Jamal, who was currently whimpering against the marble, his face squished against the countertop, offering absolutely no defense. He is an elite businessman. Brittany sobbed, her voice cracking as she pointed a shaking finger at him. He is the vice president of a premier investment group. Tell them, Jamal. Tell them who you are. The lead sheriff let out a sharp, humorless scoff. He yanked Jamal upright, holding him firmly by the chain of the handcuffs. Your husband is not an elite businessman, the sheriff stated, looking directly at Brittany with profound pity. He is a prolific con artist. The FBI has been tracking his offshore shell companies for 3 solid weeks. We know exactly where the stolen deposits went. We know about the fraudulent Cayman Island accounts. We know about the fake LLCs he registered to launder the stolen capital from this exact property deal. Brittany's mouth dropped open. She looked at Jamal, waiting for him to scream, to fight back, to deny the horrific allegations. But Jamal just stared at the floorboards, his shoulders shaking, completely defeated. How Brittany gasped, the fight entirely draining out of her. How could you possibly know about any of his private accounts? The sheriff adjusted his grip on Jamal's collar. We received a highly detailed, meticulously documented anonymous tip. He explained, his eyes briefly flicking toward me before settling back on my sister. A certified dossier containing 30 pages of decrypted financial records, forged digital signatures, and traced IP addresses. It was the most comprehensive financial exposure the Bureau has seen all year. It turns out, when you want to execute a complex interstate real estate scam, it is generally a very bad idea to do it directly under the nose of a licensed forensic accountant. The words landed with the force of a physical blow. The entire family slowly, simultaneously turned their heads to look at me. I stood perfectly still, my hands resting casually in the pockets of my winter coat. I offered them a slow, unforgiving smile. You told everyone my career was boring, Brittany, I said, my voice completely devoid of empathy. You spent the last decade telling your country club friends that I was just a glorified human calculator who liked to stare at spreadsheets. You mocked me at every family dinner because I did not wear designer labels or lease cars I could not afford. Well, you were right about one thing. I do stare at spreadsheets. And I am incredibly good at finding the numbers people try to hide. Jamal let out a devastated, pathetic wail. He finally looked at me, his eyes brimming with tears of absolute terror. He realized in that exact moment that I had not just caught him. I had orchestrated his complete and total destruction. I had let him plan the party, forge the documents, invite the investors, and walk straight into a federal trap with no possible exit. Take him out, the lead sheriff commanded. 2 deputies grabbed Jamal by the arms, dragging his dead weight across the beautiful Persian rugs. He stumbled over his expensive leather shoes, his knees buckling, as they hauled him toward the open front door. The freezing blizzard immediately engulfed him, the howling wind drowning out his frantic, desperate apologies to my sister. Brittany collapsed onto the floor, burying her face in her hands, her wails echoing against the vaulted ceilings. My mother covered her mouth, too stunned to even comfort her golden child. My father simply stared at the wall, completely hollowed out by the sheer speed and brutality of the takedown. The deputies dragged Jamal out onto the snow-covered driveway, the heavy bulldozers still roaring and waiting for the signal to tear the cabin apart. The red and blue police lights illuminated the blinding snow, casting long, terrifying shadows across the mountain. Standing directly in the path of the police cruisers, completely indifferent to the raging blizzard, was Mr. Henderson. He had not left. He had simply been waiting for the main event. He pulled the collar of his cashmere coat up against the wind, staring down at Jamal as the deputies forced him to his knees in the freezing slush to search him. Jamal looked up, his face covered in melting snow and tears, a pathetic, whimpering mess. Mr. Henderson leaned down slightly, making sure Jamal could hear him clearly over the idling engines of the bulldozers. I do not appreciate having my time wasted, Mr. Henderson stated, his voice as cold and unforgiving as the storm around them. And I certainly do not appreciate amateur conmen trying to leverage my capital for a fraudulent real estate portfolio. Jamal opened his mouth to beg, a pathetic plea forming on his lips. Save it. Mr. Henderson interrupted smoothly, turning on his heel to walk toward his waiting black SUV. I will be seeing you in federal court. Back inside the cabin, the lead sheriff turned back from the doorway, stepping out of the freezing wind and re-entering the great room. The remaining deputies closed ranks, creating a solid wall of uniforms between my family and the exit. The initial shock of Jamal's arrest was barely beginning to settle, but the sheriff's posture made it terrifyingly clear that the operation was not even close to being finished. The handover time is exactly 12:00 p.m. I announced, my voice cutting cleanly through Brittany's ongoing sobs. It is now 12:05, it is now 12:05. The heavy diesel engines of the Aspen Sierra bulldozers roared with a deafening surge of power. The thick steel treads bit violently into the frozen driveway, cracking the asphalt beneath the packed snow. The lead machine lunged forward, its massive yellow blade raising into the air, casting a terrifying jagged shadow across the great room. The physical vibration shattered the remaining crystal champagne flutes on the marble island, sending jagged shards of glass exploding across the room. The lead sheriff did not flinch at the destruction. He calmly keyed his shoulder radio, barking a sharp code to his deputies. Clear the primary structure, he ordered, his voice echoing through the chaos. Drag them out if you have to. This building is coming down. Tyler was still curled in a pathetic ball at the base of the grand staircase. His chest was heaving with rapid, shallow gasps. The blood had completely drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly, translucent shade of gray. He was actively hyperventilating, his eyes darting frantically between the front door where Jamal was currently being shoved into the back of a federal cruiser and the sheriff standing in the center of the room. The sheriff had said multiple federal arrest warrants, plural. The FBI had been tracking Jamal's offshore accounts. Tyler's mind, fueled by sheer, unadulterated panic, connected the fatal dots. His illegal sports betting ring. The massive unsecured debts he owed to violent loan sharks back in the city. The offshore wire transfers he had stupidly routed through Jamal's fake LLCs to hide the money from the IRS. If the federal government had successfully decrypted Jamal's financial network, they absolutely had Tyler's transaction history. They had everything. They were not just here for an eviction. They were here to dismantle the entire fraudulent empire my family had built. Tyler realized with a crushing, suffocating certainty that he was next. He looked at my mother. Patricia was on her hands and knees in a puddle of melted snow and spilled caviar. She was frantically sweeping up the scattered diamond earrings and gold watches that had spilled from her overturned designer handbag. Her perfectly styled hair was a ruined, tangled mess. She looked up, her mascara running in thick black rivers down her cheeks, and saw her golden boy starting to push himself off the floor. Tyler, Patricia sobbed, reaching a trembling, jewel-encrusted hand toward him. Tyler, please help me carry the silver. Help me get the furs. We cannot let them destroy our things. You have to help your mother. For 30 years, Tyler had been the undisputed prince of our family. My parents had paid off his credit card debts, bailed him out of wrecked luxury cars, and funded his lavish lifestyle without a single question. They had sacrificed my college fund to ensure Tyler could play venture capitalist. Now, in the exact moment his mother was begging for his help on her hands and knees, the golden boy looked down at her with pure, unfiltered disgust. I ignored her completely. He did not offer a hand. He did not say a comforting word. He kicked his expensive Italian loafer free from her desperate grasp, leaving her weeping on the ruined Persian rug. Tyler scrambled to his feet, his eyes wide and hunted. He looked at Brittany, who was still curled in a corner, dry heaving violently into a decorative throw pillow. He stepped right over her trembling legs. He did not care about his mother. He did not care about his hysterical sister. He only cared about saving his own skin. He spotted his heavy cashmere winter coat draped over the banister. He snatched it, not even bothering to put his arms through the sleeves, clutching it to his chest like a bulletproof vest. He whipped his head around, calculating his escape route. The front door was completely blocked by heavily armed deputies. The back patio doors were secured by another sheriff. But the kitchen service corridor was still open. The catered waitstaff had fled through there earlier, leaving the heavy swinging doors slightly ajar. It led directly to the loading dock, which backed up against the dense, unlandscaped pine forest of the northern ridge. Tyler lowered his head and sprinted. It was not a heroic dash. It was the frantic, clumsy scramble of an absolute coward. His leather soles slipped wildly on the wet hardwood, but he caught his balance against the wall, leaving a streak of sweaty handprints on the custom paint. Patricia screamed his name, a raw, tortured sound of maternal betrayal. "Tyler, where are you going? Come back!" I did not even look over his shoulder. He hit the swinging kitchen doors at full speed, bursting into the stainless steel preparation area. A lone catering manager was still lingering near the industrial sinks, desperately trying to salvage a rolling cart of silver chafing dishes before the bulldozers struck. Tyler did not slow down. He dropped his shoulder and violently shoved the manager out of his path. The man let out a shout of surprise, crashing backward into a tall metal rack of crystal glassware. The rack tipped over, sending hundreds of expensive glasses cascading onto the industrial tile with a deafening continuous crash. Tyler trampled right over the shattered glass, kicking open the heavy metal service door and plunging out onto the snowy loading dock. The freezing sub-zero mountain air hit him instantly, whipping his unbuttoned shirt around his torso. The blizzard was absolute whiteout conditions, howling with terrifying ferocity. I slowly walked across the great room, my boots crunching over the broken champagne flutes. I ignored my father, who was currently being physically restrained by a deputy against the wall. I ignored my mother's pathetic wailing. I walked straight through the swinging kitchen doors, stepping carefully over the ruined catering equipment, and stood in the open frame of the service exit. The freezing wind bit at my face, but I barely felt it. I watched Tyler leap off the edge of the loading dock. He sank immediately up to his waist in the deep, untracked snow of the mountain ridge. He thrashed wildly, his expensive loafers offering absolutely no traction as he tried to claw his way up the steep wooded incline. The blizzard was already swallowing him whole, turning his panicked, fleeing figure into a pathetic gray blur against the endless white forest. He was running blindly into a freezing wilderness with no car, no keys, and a massive target on his back. The loan sharks knew exactly where he lived, and the federal government was already freezing his assets. There was literally nowhere left for him to hide. I leaned against the frozen metal doorframe, crossing my arms over my chest, as I watched him fall face first into a snowdrift, and frantically scramble back up. "The golden boy, everyone," I said, my voice dripping with cold, triumphant satisfaction. "Always running away when the bill comes due. It is now 12:05. Right on cue, the lead sheriff keyed the radio on his shoulder, giving two short, sharp clicks. The massive front doors, already hanging wide open to the howling blizzard, were suddenly filled with a new group of men. 6 heavily built contractors stomped into the foyer, their bright neon high-visibility vests, a jarring contrast against my mother's muted designer winter wonderland. They wore hard hats, thick thermal gloves, and heavy steel-toed boots that immediately began tracking black mud and rock salt across the imported white rugs. The crew foreman, a burly man holding a thick, weather-beaten clipboard, stepped forward. He did not look at the melting ice sculptures or the terrified faces of my family. He looked directly at me, confirming my identity with a sharp professional nod before turning to the room at large. "Listen up," the foreman boomed, his voice rough and commanding over the roar of the idling machinery outside. "We hold the legal demolition permits for this structure. The perimeter is secured and heavy equipment is hot. By federal and county law, this building is now considered a hazardous teardown zone. You have exactly 15 minutes to vacate the premises before we take out the load-bearing walls. Take only what you can physically carry in your hands. Do not attempt to move furniture. Do not delay. The clock is ticking right now." For a second, the sheer absurdity of the command seemed to paralyze my parents. My father's face morphed from stunned disbelief into raw, primal panic. The authoritative, patriarchal facade he had weaponized against me for 30 years simply vanished, replaced by the frantic desperation of a cornered animal. "We have to pack," Richard shouted, his voice cracking hysterically as he spun around. "Patricia, the coats, the jewelry, get the bags." But there were no suitcases. Jamal had arranged for a luxury transport service to handle their luggage later, meaning all their Louis Vuitton weekenders were still locked in the master suite upstairs, an area the deputies had already blocked off with a solid wall of human bodies. Patricia let out a strangled, breathless shriek. Her eyes darted frantically around the destroyed great room. She lunged toward the kitchen island, tearing open the sleek custom cabinetry until she found a roll of heavy-duty black contractor garbage bags left behind by the caterers. She ripped several off the roll, tossing one aggressively to my father and clutching two for herself. It was a spectacularly degrading display. The woman who had spent my entire childhood criticizing my off-brand clothes and lecturing me about high society decorum was now frantically crawling across the floor on her hands and knees. She scrambled toward the coat check area, ripping mink stoles and Burberry trench coats off the hangers with animalistic aggression. She shoved them into the black plastic sack, not caring that the delicate, expensive fabrics were being crushed and stained by the wet floor. My father was right behind her, his face purple with exertion as he sprinted back to the catering bar. The man who had refused to co-sign my college loans because he supposedly needed liquid capital for his country club memberships was now frantically sweeping bottles of vintage Dom Perignon into his garbage bag. The heavy glass clinked and smashed together, but Richard ignored the leaking champagne staining his tailored trousers. He just kept grabbing, desperate to salvage physical proof of his manufactured wealth before the roof literally caved in on him. Brittany remained frozen on the floor, still reeling from Jamal's brutal arrest. She watched our parents scavenge like common looters, her manicured hands gripping her hair in absolute despair. Mom, Brittany wailed, her voice hoarse and broken. They took him. They took Jamal. What am I going to do? The feds have everything. Patricia did not even pause. She did not drop her garbage bag. She did not rush to comfort her golden-favored daughter. She simply stepped completely over Brittany's outstretched legs to grab a pair of abandoned designer winter boots. Get up and grab your jewelry. Brittany. Patricia snapped, her voice shrill and entirely devoid of maternal warmth. The federal government is going to seize all his bank accounts. Grab anything you can pawn right now. That was the absolute core of my family, exposed in high definition under the flashing police lights. When the illusion cracked, there was no loyalty. There was no unconditional love. There was only the frantic, clawing instinct to protect their own assets. 10 minutes, the foreman yelled, checking a heavy digital watch on his wrist. The demolition crew had already started taking sledgehammers to the custom drywall in the main hallway. The loud, concussive thuds echoed violently through the cabin, shaking the floorboards beneath our feet. Thick clouds of white plaster dust began raining down from the vaulted ceiling, coating the rented leather sofas in a fine, gritty powder. Richard dragged his overflowing garbage bag toward the front door, the heavy glass bottles clanking loudly against the hardwood. He looked completely unhinged, a wealthy man fleeing a crime scene with a trash sack full of stolen liquor. Brittany finally staggered to her feet, clutching a single velvet jewelry box to her chest, her face completely pale and vacant. Patricia hauled two massive black trash bags across the great room, her chest heaving with exertion. The blizzard outside was intensifying rapidly, whipping snow straight through the open doors and piling it into small freezing drifts against the expensive rugs. She stopped right in front of me, her breathing ragged and heavy. The thick mascara she had meticulously applied for her grand closing party was now running in dark black rivers down her face, staining her expensive silk blouse. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a sudden, horrifying realization of the reality awaiting them outside. The loan sharks, the federal agents, the total destruction of their fake empire. There was no luxury transport waiting. There was no five-star hotel booked. There was only the freezing mountain and the absolute ruin I had meticulously engineered. She dropped the garbage bags. They hit the floor with a heavy, pathetic thud. Where are we supposed to go? Patricia pleaded, her voice a desperate, hysterical screech that barely cut through the sound of the sledgehammers destroying her dream house. It is a blizzard outside. You cannot leave your parents homeless on Christmas. I stood perfectly still. The freezing wind whipped through the open front doors, sending a dusting of fine snow across the toes of my leather boots, but I did not shiver. I looked at the woman who had spent my entire life making me feel small, invisible, and inadequate. Her mascara-stained tears and theatrical sobbing, which had always been her ultimate weapon to manipulate my father and control the family narrative, washed over me without leaving a single mark. I felt absolutely nothing. Richard abandoned his garbage bag full of stolen liquor and stepped forward, puffing up his chest in a desperate, dying attempt to reclaim his patriarchal authority. Alyssa, you need to stop this right now, he demanded, his voice shaking with a pathetic mixture of rage and fear. You call off those bulldozers. You tell the sheriff this is a misunderstanding. We are your family. You do not do this to blood. I looked my father directly in the eye. The custom drywall behind him shuddered violently as another sledgehammer struck the adjacent hallway. A heavy framed mirror detached from its mounts and shattered against the hardwood floor. What was it you said in the family group chat yesterday? I asked, my voice cutting through the mechanical roar outside with glacial precision. I saw the exact moment the blood drained from Richard's face. He staggered backward, as if I had physically struck him, his mouth opening and closing without sound. I took a slow, deliberate step forward, trapping him under my gaze. I believe your exact words were, "Make sure she does not find out until the ink is dry," I quoted, watching my mother's eyes widen in sheer terror. And then Brittany chimed in with, "Who cares if she finds out? She does not have the money to sue us anyway." Patricia covered her mouth, a fresh, horrified sob tearing from her throat. Brittany, clutching her velvet jewelry box to her chest, shrank against the far wall, trying to make herself invisible. "You honestly thought you could lock me out of my own life?" I continued, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings as plaster dust rained down around us like snow. "You thought you could forge my signature on federal real estate transfers, drain my grandfather's trust, and use my corporate credentials to secure a fraudulent mortgage for a luxury mountain cabin. You handed my entire future over to a con artist like Jamal because he promised you a quick payout. You orchestrated massive financial fraud, and you smiled in my face at the dinner table while you did it. We were protecting the family assets." Richard stammered frantically, trying to string together a defense as the house vibrated around him. "Jamal said the investments were volatile. We needed liquid cash to secure our legacy. We did it for the family." "You did it for yourselves!" I snapped, my calm finally fracturing into sharp, concentrated anger. "You stole my grandfather's inheritance. You hijacked my company. You sat around a table and planned my financial ruin just so Patricia could host high society parties and you could brag to your country club friends. Well, now I know everything. The identity theft, the lies, the wire fraud. Every single fake LLC Jamal set up. Every offshore account you tried to hide the money in. And I gave every single byte of that data directly to the FBI." The lead sheriff stepped into the center of the room, his hand resting casually on his utility belt. His presence was an immovable wall of federal authority. "5 minutes, folks," the sheriff announced, his voice booming over the sound of splintering wood. "I highly suggest you make for the exit. If you are inside when the heavy machinery moves in, you will be pulled from the rubble in handcuffs." The reality of the situation finally brutally crashed down on them. There was no negotiation. There was no secret bank account to bail them out. There were no country club lawyers waiting to sweep this under the rug. They were standing inside a condemned building surrounded by armed law enforcement with absolutely nothing left to their names except the plastic garbage bags in their hands. Patricia lunged forward, falling to her knees and desperately grabbing the hem of my winter coat. "Alyssa, please," she wailed, her fingers digging frantically into the thick wool. "I am your mother. I carried you. I raised you. You have a luxury condo in the city. You have the corporate accounts. Just let us stay with you until we figure this out. We have no money. We have no cars. Jamal took everything. You cannot throw us out into the snow." I looked down at the woman clawing at my coat. I remembered the years of being told I was a disappointment. I remembered being pushed into the shadows so Brittany could shine. I remembered the cold, calculating betrayal when they sold the warehouse my grandfather had explicitly left to me, treating my future like a petty cash fund for their own vanity. I reached down and firmly peeled her fingers off my coat, stepping back out of her reach. "You made your choices," I said, my voice completely steady. "You gambled everything on Jamal's fake empire because greed was the only thing this family actually valued. Now the house always wins." I turned my back on them and walked toward the massive front doors. The demolition foreman was already signaling the heavy equipment operators outside. The massive yellow bulldozer at the edge of the driveway revved its engine, the heavy steel blade lowering with a terrifying metallic screech, preparing to tear straight through the custom mahogany front porch. "Alyssa," my father screamed over the deafening noise, his voice utterly broken. "You cannot do this." I stopped in the doorway, the freezing blizzard immediately whipping my hair around my face. The cold was absolute, but it felt clean. It felt like freedom. I reached up, pulling my heavy wool collar tight against the bitter wind, and slowly zipped up my coat. I looked back at the three of them one last time. My mother weeping on the ruined rug, my father clutching a garbage bag of stolen wine, my sister paralyzed by the total destruction of her manufactured life. They were completely stripped of their illusions, exposed to the brutal, freezing reality of their own actions. "I suggest you call an Uber," I said. "They have great heaters. Merry Christmas." I turned my back on them and walked toward the command post the deputies had established near the edge of the property line. Behind me, the lead sheriff finally ran out of patience. He snapped his fingers, and two massive deputies moved in, physically gripping Richard and Patricia by the arms and marching them toward the threshold. Patricia shrieked as the sub-zero wind hit her face. She stumbled over the doorway, her designer boots slipping instantly on the ice. She went down hard on one knee, dropping a black plastic garbage bag. The heavy glass bottles of stolen champagne inside shattered on impact, leaking golden liquid into the dirty snow. Richard did not stop to help her. He kept his head down, clutching his own trash bag full of fur coats to his chest, leaning entirely into the wind as he trudged down the long, unforgiving driveway. Brittany was the last to emerge. She was shivering violently, her thin cocktail dress offering absolutely zero protection against the brutal mountain blizzard. She clutched her velvet jewelry box like a life preserver, sobbing hysterically as her stilettos punched through the packed snow, making it impossible for her to walk normally. She looked exactly like what she had always been beneath the expensive highlights and the borrowed wealth. She was a frightened, shallow girl with absolutely nothing of her own. Over by the line of federal cruisers, the scene was equally pathetic. Jamal was pressed against the side of a squad car. A deputy was patting down his tailored suit, pulling out forged credit cards, a burner phone, and a wad of cash. Jamal was trembling, the melting snow plastering his hair to his forehead. He looked toward the driveway, watching his fake wife and his fake in-laws dragging garbage bags through the slush. He did not call out to them. They did not look at him. The deputy pushed Jamal's head down, shoving him unceremoniously into the back of the cruiser. The heavy metal door slammed shut, sealing him inside a cage of reinforced glass and steel. I stood near the edge of the tree line, watching the red and blue emergency lights wash over the chaotic scene. The biting cold stung my cheeks, but my blood was running hot with the absolute finality of this moment. "Miss Wilson." I turned to see Mr. Henderson walking slowly toward me. He had ignored the entire spectacle of my family's disgraceful exit, his focus entirely on the logistics of the raid. His dark wool overcoat was pristine, his posture relaxed despite the howling wind. "Mr. Henderson," I replied, matching his calm, professional tone. "I apologize for the dramatic interruption to your holiday weekend." He let out a short, dry bark of a laugh. "Do not apologize," he stated, his eyes locking onto mine. "You just saved my investment firm $20 million in fraudulent capital." Jamal Vance presented an incredibly convincing portfolio. The fake deeds, the forged zoning permits, the shell companies. It was a masterpiece of corporate deception. If we had wired that money into his Cayman accounts tomorrow morning as planned, it would have taken years of litigation to recover even a fraction of it. He pulled his hands from his pockets, folding them together as he assessed me. "My internal auditors completely missed the discrepancies." Mr. Henderson continued, his voice hardening slightly at the mention of his own team's failure. "They looked at the shiny letterhead and the projected profit margins, and they bought the illusion. You did not. You dug through the metadata. You traced the IP addresses. You dismantled a multi-million-dollar scam from a laptop in your living room." "I have a very low tolerance for liars," I answered simply. Mr. Henderson smiled. It was a genuine, predatory smile. "It is a rare trait to find someone who sees the numbers without the emotion attached to them," he noted. "You do not get distracted by the noise. I am firing my entire risk assessment team on Monday morning. I need someone with your specific, ruthless set of skills to audit my entire remaining portfolio. I want you to tear it apart and find any other liabilities they missed." He reached inside his coat and pulled out a thick, embossed business card, holding it out to me between two gloved fingers. "Call my private office on Monday at 8 in the morning," Mr. Henderson commanded. "We will discuss your retainer. I guarantee it will be significantly more than whatever your current firm is paying you. Have a good holiday, Alyssa. He turned and walked back to his waiting SUV, climbing into the warm leather interior before the driver merged smoothly onto the main road, slipping past my family without even slowing down. I looked down at the heavy cardstock in my hand. My mother had spent my entire life telling me that my career was a boring, pointless waste of time. She had mocked my accounting degree while praising Jamal's imaginary venture capital firm. Now my boring career had just secured me an executive contract with one of the most powerful men in the state. I tucked the card safely into my pocket and turned my attention back to the cabin. The federal agents had finished their final sweep. The lead sheriff emerged onto the porch, raising his hand and giving a sharp, definitive thumbs up to the demolition foreman. The area was clear. The structure was completely surrendered. Down at the bottom of the driveway, 2 miles from the nearest main road, I could barely see the silhouettes of my parents and my sister. They were tiny, shivering figures dragging black garbage bags through knee-deep snow, moving further and further away into the whiteout conditions of the blizzard. There were no cabs coming up this mountain. There was no cell service to call for help. They were going to have to walk every single miserable mile back to civilization. The roar of the diesel engine surged to a deafening pitch. I turned my face toward the massive Aspen Sierra bulldozers. The lead machine lurched forward, its thick steel treads crushing the frozen landscaping. The operator pulled a heavy lever, and the massive rusted metal claw rose high into the swirling snow. It hung there for a split second, a heavy iron fist suspended over the luxurious stolen dream house. Then it dropped. The iron claw smashed directly through the center of the grand mahogany front porch. The sound of the impact was explosive. Thick wooden beams splintered and snapped like dry twigs. The custom-stained glass windows on the second floor shattered from the sheer concussive force, raining thousands of glittering shards into the snow. The heavy vaulted roof groaned, the structural integrity failing instantly as the bulldozer ripped the load-bearing pillars out of the foundation. I stood perfectly still, watching the walls cave in on the imported Persian rugs, the melted ice sculptures, and the remnants of Patricia's fake high society life. The physical destruction of the cabin was absolute and unforgiving. It was violent, loud, and incredibly fast. It mirrored the exact destruction of the toxic family dynamic that had suffocated me for 30 years. The roof collapsed inward with a final thunderous crash, sending a massive plume of white snow and drywall dust shooting into the dark winter sky. The house was gone. The illusion was dead. I turned my back on the wreckage, pulled my collar tight against the wind, and started walking toward the sheriff's cruiser to get my ride down the mountain. I had a lot of work to do on Monday. The freezing wind bit at my face, but the adrenaline pumping through my veins kept the cold completely at bay. I walked past the chaotic line of flashing red and blue emergency lights, my boots crunching rhythmically against the packed icy snow. A few deputies gave me brief, respectful nods as I bypassed their secure barricades, stepping out of the disaster zone and into the quiet darkness of the tree line. Just beyond the perimeter, idling silently in the shadows of the towering pines, was the sleek black Escalade I had chartered earlier that afternoon. The driver, a consummate professional in a dark tailored suit, immediately stepped out into the blizzard to pull open the heavy rear door. I climbed inside, sinking deeply into the heated leather seat. The heavy door clicked shut behind me, sealing perfectly. The contrast was instantaneous. The thick, soundproof glass of the luxury SUV severed the outside world completely. The deafening roar of the bulldozers tearing the remaining timber of the cabin to shreds was instantly reduced to a dull, insignificant thud. The wailing of the police sirens became nothing more than a silent, flashing light show, painting the snowdrifts in harsh strokes of red and blue neon. I looked out the heavily tinted window and caught one final cinematic glimpse of my family. Brittany was slipping down the icy shoulder of the mountain road. Her designer stilettos had long since given out, leaving her to hobble in the freezing slush in bare, freezing feet. Her arms were wrapped tightly around her chest, and her mouth was open in a continuous hysterical scream that I could no longer hear. Beside her, Richard and Patricia were reduced to pathetic, shivering silhouettes, desperately trying to wave down a massive county snowplow. The heavy yellow truck simply roared past them, blinding them in a massive wave of dirty, salted slush. I watched the freezing spray hit my mother's ruined silk blouse, and I felt absolutely nothing. For 30 years, I had been the designated shock absorber for that family. Every financial misstep Richard made was blamed on the volatile economy, while every penny I spent on my own education was treated as a selfish, ungrateful drain on their resources. Every irrational tantrum Brittany threw was catered to with expensive vacations and designer jewelry, while my silent, straight-A academic achievements were met with indifferent, dismissive nods. They had meticulously conditioned me to believe my only acceptable role was to be useful, quiet, and fundamentally less than them. Because I never screamed, because I never threw plates or demanded the spotlight, they honestly believed I was weak. They mistook my engineered silence for absolute submission. They had no idea that while they were busy playing dress-up for the country club elite, I was learning the exact mechanical blueprints of the wealth they only pretended to possess. When Richard refused to co-sign my first apartment lease in the city, telling me I needed to learn the harsh realities of the real world to build character, he thought he was punishing me. Instead, he forced me to become financially bulletproof. I built my career from the absolute ground up, learning how to audit multinational conglomerates, how to trace invisible funds through digital labyrinths, and how to dismantle corrupt corporate structures brick by brick. I became a ghost in the machine, understanding the precise language of numbers infinitely better than I understood their twisted conditional version of love. When Jamal slithered into their lives with his fake Rolexes, his leased sports cars, and his offshore investment jargon, they embraced him immediately because he spoke their superficial language. He sold them the exact illusion of effortless supremacy they craved. And when they realized they needed heavy liquid collateral to fund his phantom ventures, they did not hesitate for a fraction of a second to steal from me. They cannibalized my grandfather's trust, forged my signature on federal real estate transfers, and stripped my inheritance bare. They genuinely believed I was too conditioned by years of emotional neglect to ever uncover the fraud. Or worse, they arrogantly assumed that even if I did find out, I would dutifully stay quiet to protect the sacred family name. They were wrong. I did not cry when I found the forged transfer deeds buried deep in the county registry's digital archives. I did not confront them, beg for a tearful explanation, or demand an apology. Apologies from narcissists are just different shapes of manipulation. Instead, I went to work. I spent 6 months meticulously tracing every single wire transfer, mapping out Jamal's entire network of Cayman shell companies, and securing the undeniable forensic proof of my parents' willing complicity. I weaponized their own greed against them, orchestrating the exact flawless sequence of events that led the federal government straight to their front door on Christmas Eve. I leaned my head back against the plush headrest, letting out a long, slow breath as the driver navigated the treacherous switchbacks. The flashing police lights faded into the whiteout conditions until there was nothing left behind us but the dark, quiet, endless forest. My heart rate was slow and steady. There was no lingering guilt. There was no sudden, crushing wave of grief for the family I had just annihilated. The severance was clean, clinical, and absolutely permanent. The toxic anchor that had dragged me down for 3 decades was finally cut loose, left to freeze on the side of a mountain. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water from the center console, the ice clinking softly in the quiet, climate-controlled cabin. I was a 32-year-old woman with a pristine professional reputation, a highly lucrative new executive auditing contract waiting on my desk for Monday morning, and a future entirely of my own making. I had survived them, and then I had utterly outsmarted them. The perfect silence of the luxury SUV was suddenly broken by a sharp, melodic chime. I set my glass in the cup holder and pulled my phone from my coat pocket. The screen illuminated the dim cabin. It was an urgent push notification from my secure banking app. I unlocked the screen, expecting to see a routine automated alert about the escrow account freeze I had initiated earlier that week. Instead, a new highly classified message flashed across the interface detailing a massive, entirely unexpected incoming offshore wire transfer. My thumb hovered over the biometric scanner for a fraction of a second before pressing down. The screen unlocked instantly. The spinning blue loading icon felt agonizingly slow against the rapid beating of my heart. The screen refreshed, clearing away the standard interface of my daily checking account to reveal a separate newly minted high-yield portfolio. The sender was Aspen Sierra Holdings. It was the parent company of the demolition contractors, the massive firm that had quietly purchased the foreclosed property rights at absolute rock bottom after Jamal's fraudulent mortgage defaulted. I had tipped them off, provided the clean geological surveys, and negotiated a massive finder's fee for the uncontested, highly lucrative land acquisition. I knew the payout was coming, but seeing the actual tangible numbers rendered on the glowing OLED screen took the breath right out of my lungs. 4,000 Twiro. The deposit had officially cleared. The funds were completely unencumbered, sitting safely in an account that bore only my name. There were no joint signatories. There were no parental guarantors required to secure the balance. It was an impermeable fortress of total financial independence. I stared at the 9 digits, feeling a profound tectonic shift in the foundation of my reality. For decades, Richard and Patricia had weaponized money. They had used it as a heavy iron leash, choking off my ambitions while blindly funding Brittany's ridiculous vanity projects and Tyler's catastrophic failures. They had deliberately kept me financially insecure to ensure I would always remain submissive and reliant on their conditional charity. That leash was now entirely incinerated. The digital severance. A banner notification suddenly slid down from the top of my screen. It was the family group chat. Despite the heavy blizzard and the remote mountain location, a single bar of cell service had miraculously connected to a nearby tower. The messages flooded in a frantic, pathetic stream of digital panic illuminating my phone. Richard was demanding I answer my phone immediately, his texts riddled with typos. Patricia was sending walls of hysterical text, oscillating wildly between vicious threats of legal action and pathetic pleas for me to wire them emergency hotel funds. Brittany simply sent strings of crying emojis begging someone to send a rescue helicopter. Tyler, ever the coward, had remained completely silent, likely still freezing in a ditch somewhere miles away. I read the messages with total, unwavering apathy. The words had lost all their power. They were just desperate noise from strangers I used to know. I opened the chat settings. I tapped on my father's contact icon. I thought about the He laughed in my face when I asked for a modest loan to start my auditing firm, telling me I lacked the predatory instinct required for real business. I tapped the block contact button. A red confirmation screen appeared. I hit confirm. I scrolled to my mother's name. I remembered the endless, exhausting critiques of my wardrobe, my career, and my personality. I remembered how she had smiled proudly as Jamal handed over the keys to a cabin bought with my stolen credentials, entirely unconcerned with the federal felonies required to secure it. I tapped block. I hit confirm. I found Brittany's profile next. The golden child who had never lifted a single finger to defend me, who had actively participated in my planned ruin, simply because she wanted a free ski vacation to brag about on social media. I tapped block. I hit confirm. Finally, I scrolled to Tyler, the brother who had physically trampled a catering manager just to save his own skin, fleeing blindly into the frozen woods rather than face the consequences of his illegal sports gambling debts. I tapped block. I hit confirm. I backed out of the individual profiles and looked at the family group chat one last time. It was a digital graveyard of manipulation, gaslighting, and manufactured affection. I swiped left across the thread. A red trash can icon appeared. I tapped delete permanently. The thread vanished. The screen was completely clear. The digital severance was just as absolute and final as the physical destruction of the cabin. I locked my phone and placed it face down on the polished leather console. The silence inside the SUV was profound, matching the sudden expansive quiet inside my own mind. There were absolutely no tears. There was no lingering regret. There was only clean, clinical, deeply satisfying closure, the new destination. The driver navigated the heavy SUV down the winding mountain pass, the four-wheel drive handling the treacherous snow-packed curves with heavy mechanical confidence. The blizzard was still raging fiercely outside, but the heater inside the cabin was blowing warm, dry air, thawing the last remaining chill from my bones. The chaos of the police sirens, my screaming sister, and the crumbling house faded entirely, swallowed up by the thick soundproof glass of the car. Miss Wilson. The driver's deep voice crackled through the intercom, separating the front cabin from the rear passenger compartment. We will be hitting the interstate in approximately 10 minutes. The state plows have cleared the primary lanes. Shall I road us back to your downtown apartment? I leaned forward, looking through the tinted window, at the dark snow-covered pines rushing past us. My downtown apartment was tied to a life I no longer needed to live. It was a safe, quiet place I had built to hide from my family's constant scrutiny and endless demands. I no longer needed to hide. I had a massive, high-profile auditing contract waiting for me on Monday morning with Mr. Henderson, and $4 million in liquid capital to begin building an empire that was entirely my own. I reached out and tapped the digital display mounted on the back of the center console, opening the GPS map interface. The screen glowed brightly, showing our current trajectory toward the city limits. I highlighted my home address in the destination field and hit delete. No, I said, my voice strong and completely unwavering. We are not going to the apartment. I typed a new destination into the glowing navigation bar and hit route. Take me to the international airport, I instructed. Take me to the international airport, I instructed. Understood, Miss Wilson, the driver replied, his voice a smooth professional rumble through the intercom. He tapped the glowing navigation console, seamlessly altering our trajectory. The massive SUV leaned gently into the next hairpin turn, leaving the fractured ruins of the mountain community far behind us in the rearview mirror. The further we descended from the high elevation of the raid, the more the brutal blizzard began to surrender. The impenetrable wall of swirling white snow gradually thinned out, losing its violent momentum. Heavy, dark winter clouds that had suffocated the mountain all morning finally began to crack and part. A brilliant, blinding ray of high-altitude sunlight pierced through the overcast sky, striking the snow-covered pines and transforming the bleak, frozen landscape into a glittering, pristine wonderland. The storm was officially over. I slipped off my heavy winter coat, letting it fall carelessly onto the empty leather seat beside me. The cabin of the Escalade was perfectly climate-controlled, a warm and secure sanctuary, completely detached from the wreckage I had just engineered. I picked up my phone, bypassed the empty graveyard of blocked contacts, and opened my Bluetooth settings. I synced my device to the luxury sound system of the SUV and tapped a customized playlist I had compiled specifically for this exact moment. A vibrant, upbeat Christmas jazz track instantly flooded the cabin. The rich, energetic blare of a brass section and the smooth walking rhythm of an upright bass replaced the heavy, suffocating silence. The music was lively, sophisticated, and entirely joyful. It was the absolute antithesis of the miserable, screaming chaos my family was currently enduring on the side of the road. For the past 30 years, the holiday season had been a manufactured nightmare. It was a stressful, toxic marathon of catering to Patricia's neurotic dinner party demands, financing Brittany's endless vanity gifts, and listening to Richard boast about non-existent investments. I had spent every previous December making myself as small and useful as possible, silently balancing their checkbooks just to avoid their crosshairs. This year, my holiday itinerary looked completely different. I opened my email and pulled up my digital boarding pass. First-class priority boarding, direct to Zurich. From there, a private helicopter charter was scheduled to take me directly to a 5-star, ultra-exclusive ski resort tucked high in the remote Swiss Alps. I had booked the solo retreat weeks ago, mapping out every luxurious detail the very moment I submitted the anonymous tip to the Federal Financial Crimes Division. I had secured a master suite with a panoramic view of the Matterhorn, a private stone fireplace, and a dedicated concierge. There would be no forged deeds, no screaming matches over stolen champagne, and no desperate scrambling to maintain a pathetic illusion of wealth. I was going to spend the next 2 weeks skiing pristine powder, eating fondue, drinking vintage wine, and enjoying the absolute unadulterated silence of a life entirely under my own control. I took a deep breath, inhaling the faint scent of expensive leather and polished wood inside the vehicle. The contrast between my current reality and the miserable fate of my family was striking. Right now, Richard, Patricia, and Brittany were likely shivering in the back of a county sheriff's van, waiting to be booked into a federal holding facility. They would be interrogated by agents who had absolutely zero patience for their country club entitlement. Jamal was already wearing handcuffs, facing decades in a federal penitentiary for orchestrating a multi-million-dollar wire fraud conspiracy. They had built their entire identities on deception and theft, and gravity had finally caught up with them. And then there was the $4 million resting securely in my offshore portfolio. It was not just a finder's fee from the Aspen Sierra demolition firm. It was restitution. It was the exact numerical value of my grandfather's stolen trust, returned to me with significant interest. I had not just survived their betrayal. I had mathematically dismantled them and profited from their destruction. The money was my armor. It guaranteed that I would never have to rely on anyone ever again. Mr. Henderson's executive auditing contract was simply the final golden feather in the cap of my victory. I possessed the ruthless skills to expose and ruin anyone who attempted to deceive me. I was completely untouchable. The winding mountain roads eventually straightened out, merging smoothly onto the cleared multi-lane interstate. The Escalade picked up speed, the powerful engine humming a low, steady note beneath the lively jazz music. Outside the tinted windows, the rugged wilderness gave way to the sleek modern infrastructure of the city outskirts. The towering glass and steel architecture of the international airport finally came into view on the horizon, gleaming brightly under the clear winter sun. We bypassed the chaotic, congested lanes of the commercial departure terminals and merged onto the exclusive access road reserved for premium international travelers and private charters. The driver pulled the SUV smoothly to a halt beneath a grand heated canopy. A sharply dressed airport porter instantly appeared, pulling open my door and offering a respectful bow. The crisp, clean winter air rushed into the cabin, but it no longer felt biting or cruel. It felt incredibly refreshing. I stepped out of the vehicle and looked up at the massive glass facade of the terminal. The reflection of the bright, cloudless sky stared back at me. I slipped my phone into my pocket, the upbeat jazz still playing softly in my ears. I left the wreckage of my toxic family, the shattered remains of their stolen cabin, and 30 years of engineered submission entirely behind me on that frozen mountain. I adjusted my posture, standing perfectly straight. A genuine relaxed smile spread across my face. I was rich, I was free, and I was finally exactly where I deserved to be. Fade to black. The most profound takeaway from Alyssa's journey is that true empowerment often requires a complete clinical severance from toxic environments. For decades, her family weaponized their conditional approval, expecting her to remain a submissive shock absorber for their dysfunction. Instead of endlessly fighting for validation from people fundamentally incapable of giving it, Alyssa chose to engineer her own absolute independence. She realized that protecting your peace sometimes means walking away entirely and letting natural consequences run their course. True wealth isn't merely financial, it is the absolute freedom to define your own worth. How have you established healthy boundaries in your own life? Share your experiences and comment below.